All right. Paul Leendertse. Did I say that right?
You got it.
I got it.
You got it.
Can you share the worst pronunciation you've had again?
Yeah. It's Leendertse.
That is so bad.
It's one of many over the years.
Like, you have a pretty unique last name, but I mean, Leendertse, that's, I don't know how you
It's always been a challenge. I think I couldn't pronounce it myself when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah, it took me till like grade 2 or something to get it right.
Where does it come from?
I think it's Dutch.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say like Dutch or German or something like that. Okay, cool.
My first name's easy. That makes up for it, Paul.
Oh, I thought you meant like literally your first name's easy. I'm like, dude, what? First name is very easy to pronounce, Paul.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too, man. I've been really looking forward to this. I met you at Living Free Festival in Australia. We were already friends on Facebook before that, but we never really chatted before. Like, you had seen some of my stuff, liked it. I'd seen and liked some of your stuff. And then I listened to a podcast that you were on with Daniel Roitis, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for Daniel. He's a good friend of mine. And then, of course, like I said, saw you at Living Free, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting, especially because I'm interested in how emotions play a part in disease as it is. And I know we're going to get into that quite a bit during this episode, but I think it's most appropriate to start with you just sort of introducing yourself to the audience and then going into your story.
Okay. Well, I've been focusing on the root cause of cancer for 16 years now. That's been my primary focus, day in and day out. It's been quite the journey. That began back in 2008 when I had 2 people close to me die of cancer. And way back then, I was already really passionate about holistic health. So my knowledge then, I thought, was pretty advanced. Like, I'd taken a bunch of training on holistic health, and I was aware of lots of physical things. So much, like, don't use a microwave. I was into high quality supplements and stay away from electromagnetic radiation in general. You got to sleep well. Your body repairs when you're sleeping mostly. So if you don't sleep well, that's going to be a big problem. Get exercise. Make sure you're getting rid of toxic body care products, like on, that kind of stuff. But all of that knowledge that I had, plus working with naturopaths, plus also having to just work with, because both my family members were resistant to having to do things like chemotherapy, radiation, all of that didn't work. Mm-hmm. So it was a pretty significant...
You mean all the holistic approaches that they took?
Yeah, the holistic stuff didn't work. The traditional stuff didn't work. And all the knowledge I had back then with all my training didn't work. Mm-hmm. And because I felt like we really tried almost everything. And when that didn't work twice, it was like a life-changing experience with me, like a crisis of knowledge, like what the heck's going on? So I stopped searching for solutions to cancer, like looking for like cures, looking for things that are going to like destroy cancer. I just stopped. And instead, for about 2 years, I was meditating and questioning and pondering, what is cancer? Because I thought, if we're wrong, if mainstream society is wrong about what cancer is and what actually causes it, then it would make sense to me that all this stuff didn't work. And so that launched me into this path of sort of like my own personal kind of like pioneering work on the root cause of cancer. And eventually I wrote a book called The Root Cause of Cancer. I wrote that in 2010 and published it in 2012. And my theory was stress is somehow, like psycho-emotional stress is somehow related to cancer.
Psycho-emotional stress specifically?
Yeah, specifically. And at that time I thought, there's all these physical insults to the body that exist in the world. Like, yeah, get rid of the microwave still. Cut out pesticides and all of that. I still really believed that was all contributing factors. And perhaps it is in some kind of a way. But as time went on, so I wrote my book and I said, we got to look at this holistically. We got to start looking at the physical factors of stress in our life, like the toxins. We got to look at the emotional factors of stress in our life, the spiritual factors, And I wasn't really quite that wise yet to the emotional realm and to spiritual stuff. But that was my theory. And my book did really well. Like, I just published it myself because some of the things I share in there and explain aren't really acceptable to general publishers. They won't publish that.
Makes sense. Totally makes sense.
So I had to just publish it myself. But then what happened is I ended up having someone with stage 4 cancer come directly to my house. They had read my book and they said, your book talks about how stress could be the cause of cancer in some way. And I've been on this journey of trying to heal, and now I've been told I'm going to die in 2 months. I have multiple tumors on my spine. I've worked with, I've done everything alternative I can. I've done all kinds of chemotherapy rounds and radiation, and my cancer keeps coming back. Like, I've been in remission, and then for a period of time, and then my cancer comes back, and it's in more spots. Then I've been back into remission, and then it comes back. And now I've been told nothing can be done. So she's kind of like, 2 months, they told her she'd be dead.
What type did she have?
She had, it started in one of her sex organs. I forget which one it started with, but like the ovary of their uterus, and then it ended up spreading to the other one. And then it spread to like her liver, and then it was like in her lungs, and then it was on her spine, in the bone. So it was really severe. And what she said to me, she sat on my front porch with me. She said that in all these years of my battle with cancer, no one has talked to me about the stress in my life. You're the first person based on your book. So can I talk to you about that? Like, yeah, let's talk about it. So I sat on my porch with her for like hours, and she shared with me all sorts of personal things that were going on. And wow, she had gone through so much. And so this became kind of like my first client, which was not planned. I just had a theory about cancer that was meaningful to me. My theory was pretty powerful. So it's been many years now, and I've had to adjust that and refine my theory, because I realized, which was really difficult for me, maybe like 8 years in or something, I realized something actually isn't quite accurate about what I theorized. And now I believe I have a much more accurate, deep understanding of cancer. But my book still is relevant because, like, I can explain why that's still relevant. But, well, in general, what I was saying, it's still true. We got to get rid of the stress in our life. We've got to resolve the stress. And that's the only way cancer is really going to go away long term. You can destroy cancer. There's lots of things out there that can destroy cancer, but it comes back. Because if you don't get to the root of what's really causing it to grow, then it just keeps growing back. It's like a weed. You got to get it at the roots, or else the weed's never going to stop growing. So anyways, that woman, by working with me and talking about all these deeper aspects, and this also launched me into discussions and thoughts about God, because one of the first things she said to me is, please do not, she was like angry. She said, do not talk to me about God, by the way. So I'm going to talk about like some deep stuff with you, but I don't want to hear. And she was swearing. She was really angry about that, because she had been praying to God and people had been praying for her. And, she's just going through like really painful experiences, just feeling like she's being tortured through this cancer journey. Cancer is not a nice experience at all.
Right.
So I had to talk to her about God. I had to, because like that obviously is a big source of stress in her life. She's angry. So gradually we kind of like sorted through some things, and I did have some knowledge about emotional health at that point, because I had already started opening up to that. And she healed. So what should have been impossible became possible. And that experience like triggered something in me. Something was already in motion, right? I wrote my book, but that made it so that almost like for 16 years now, I have not been able to stop trying to uncover all the layers and all the details of what's really going on with cancer in this deeper realm of the stresses going on in people's lives. And now today, I've really accumulated a lot of knowledge here. Like I've discovered a lot. It's taught me a lot. So,
how many people would you say you've worked with in total?
A few hundred. Okay. I don't think I've broken like 1,000 people mark yet.
Still a lot,
but
though.
several hundred for sure.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
Especially since the pandemic occurred, because I had to go online.
Mm-hmm.
So when the pandemic occurred, I stopped my program.
Pandemic?
What did you say?
I'm just messing with you.
Yeah.
But you had to go online.
I had to go online, and because of that, it limited me to where but there was tremendous value in this, actually. But it limited me in a way that now all I can do is do a Zoom session with someone from like across the world, sit and discuss things for 2-3 hours. But what I was doing, and that was the 10-year mark actually when 2020 hit, roughly, I had been having people with cancer come and live with me.
Wow.
So what I realized is, and I was really adamant that it was related to stress going on in a person's life or inside themselves, like we can have a lot of internal stuff happening related to stress. So my plan was to help people first of all by removing them from all that. So just come live with me. And people were willing to do that because they had tried everything. So the majority of people that came to my program were stage 4. So they didn't care if I was an oncologist or if I was a naturopath or like, who was I? I was just some guy with a passion. This
is like a last resort for them. Yeah.
But they had tried everything. Yeah. But they also realized I have not tried looking into the stresses in my life. So now I want to do that, but I'm like the only one offering it, apparently. So that they were aware of, at least.
Yeah.
So they would come live with me for 3 to 4 weeks. And then it was like pretty much miraculous, because I started seeing people's cancer just shrinking, like by the day.
And what were you doing on a daily basis?
So every single day, in the beginning, I was focused on a whole bunch of physical stuff still, which I still always...
I think there's elements of that, I would imagine.
It's still important. Yeah. So we're cleaning up the diet, we're doing some detoxification, we're getting out into nature. I was raising my own animals and food. Like, so I had goats and chickens and sheep, which was really healing for people.
I have some thoughts on that we'll discuss later, like as it relates to all those things and how they relate to emotions and our ability to process them. So we'll set that aside.
Yeah, I'm interested in that discussion. Yeah. So I had walking trails, beautiful forest that I was kind of keeping up, like cleaning the trails and grooming certain things. But it was a really supportive environment for healing. And so in addition to all those physical things, cleaning up their diet, etc., sleeping really well at night, like a really quiet space. There's no traffic. I was in the middle of a forest, 15 acres. In addition to that, we just focused every single day doing sessions, talking. What's going on in your life? What went on in your childhood? Who are your parents? How are they? What kind of egos do they have? Like, we all have an ego structure, right? Like, what are their behavior patterns? What are your behavior patterns? And just going into it. When were you diagnosed? When did you notice symptoms in your body? And that started, well, many times just spontaneously, people would cry, first of all, because we'd start talking about it, like a personal, emotionally painful incident in their life. And that would start triggering emotions that they had suppressed, like that they were carrying, that they'd not released. And through that experience, they were healing. So it was really powerful. And over a 10-year period, I had a 90% success rate.
Wow.
And I want to say we had one, because I wasn't healing people.
Right.
We're a team, but they're the ones that are really accessing themselves and wanting to go into that realm and resolve this stuff going on inside, right? So I started to learn a lot through that. A painful realization that I learned, which I think I'd love to share right now, is that I also noticed with about 40% of the people that came whose lump disappeared, like pain's gone, they can walk again, like things like that over the course of 3 to 4 weeks. That's how we gauged if they were healed. Like a tumor that's bulging out of the skin is gone, can't feel it anymore, etc. Many of them didn't want to go back to the medical system at all. They're just done with it. Now they're just focused on like the future, But 40% there was one incident at least, but where just a couple months later, but some it took like several months or a couple years, their cancer came back. So it was a success, but then when they went back into their life, it reversed again. And that's when I realized, okay, it's not enough just to have someone come to a beautiful environment and
do a retreat, essentially.
Yeah, do a retreat and be in this super safe place and not be in the stresses of their job, the relationships, whatever. Resolve all of that there, but have it not resolved back in their reality, because the causal factor can just reinitiate cancer again. So that was a painful realization, but also important. And so then my focus started to shift into integration as well. So like, let's get you into a safe environment to like, so you can start healing yourself. And then let's make sure that you learn everything you need to learn and you change everything back in your reality so you stay healed. So when 2020 hit, I had to just stop that program for a variety of reasons. People couldn't fly to see me anymore, etc. And I went online. And that was it's like it reversed everything for me, where now it's not like a full 30 days, it's 2 hours. You got 2 hours to connect with a person, you know? And that taught me so much more. So what I've been doing for the last 2 years, and the last year in particular, is I've been building, and it's essentially done. There's a few things I definitely still want to add, but I've created an online program to teach people what they need to understand about cancer, about how their body works, about how their energy field works, about how our heart works and our different, like our psyche, our subconscious, how to approach cancer spiritually, all the factors involved that I've learned over these years, so that a person can be equipped with the knowledge they need to heal themselves.
Was it because you went online and people were having to consume and digest this information, most likely in the environment in which this cancer arose, there was a higher tendency for them to have success resolving it because they were actually in the environment, rather than how it was previously going to your house in a retreat style setting, as you said, but then having to go back to their normal life before?
That's a really good question. It sort of depends. In some instances, people really need to get away from their environment, and they don't need to come to a retreat.
Those that do get away from their environment have to either reintegrate if they have to enter back into that previous environment, or they have to just stay the F away
or
from
not
it
go
completely.
back to it.
Yeah, or not go back to it. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it gets really challenging. It's difficult. Like, in order to heal from cancer, you have to change something, like inside yourself or in your life, that's directly related to the cancer. Change is absolutely necessary, and that's not always easy. It's almost never easy. Like cancer is not a simple disease. It's not just, you got to change your mindset. It's not even close to that. It's sure, changing your mindset has value, of course, but it's more about like significant change at the soul level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's really opened me up to deeper things, spiritual. Like I went from physical to like, wait, I got to focus on the emotional, and then that took me deeper into the spiritual.
Right.
So I see that as a deeper element.
Could totally see that. So the mainstream would say that cancer is just an uncontrolled growth and spread of abnormal cells, and they label certain genetic predispositions. And really, from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, the mainstream is still basically saying it's not conclusive what the true cause of cancer is. We're not entirely sure what causes cancer. Maybe they've identified something like insane amounts of exposure to radiation, which is ironic because then they also use a form of radiation to quote, treat cancer. And like I said, so-called genetic predispositions. But in your mind, so we've discussed what, from a high level, is the cause according to your whole framework. But what is cancer itself? What is it?
Well, so your first question, yeah, I think you're right that the mainstream medical beliefs and teachings are still that cancer is somehow a genetic error or like a cell gone wrong. And it also is genetic with regards to like running in families and stuff like that.
Like they say that there's a certain gene or whatever that women, if they have it, then they have a higher chance of getting breast cancer in their life, despite not actually being able to show a true correlation to that gene.
Right. And it's not, it doesn't add up. It's not how it actually works in reality, because and that's another thing I ended up encountering, is that I've had clients with breast cancer confused, saying that apparently this gene, BCRA gene, is the genetic cause of breast cancer, but they don't have the gene.
Right. And then they have breast cancer.
Yeah, but they have breast cancer. Right. And other things were revealed to me too over the years. A common thought in the medical system is that smoking causes lung cancer. And of course, smoking is not healthy. But I've had lots of clients with lung cancer that have never smoked in their life.
Right. Or vice versa, like dudes who smoke like crazy. I mean, you look at Native Americans across, like, over the course of time, or even people across the world, indigenous cultures over the course of time that smoked. Most of them did it in ceremony in a very intentional way, but a lot of them did just like freaking chain smoke. I didn't see lung cancer rampant amongst their societies, unless, you know, the history books are hiding those from us, or we're getting a flawed version of history, which I believe we are in a lot of ways. But the point being, like, that wasn't rampant amongst society, you know? So
yeah, it's not, I don't think it's the causal factor. Obviously it's not. Yeah. So what is cancer? So I think I want to just comment on my book, because my second book isn't quite out yet, because what I had to do is, when I learned, originally I wrote 3 books, a whole series, and I broke it down into different levels of understanding. But after my first book was released, as I shared, I started having people come to me with cancer to see if I could help them. And that kind of slowed everything down with me releasing my second book. And then it also started to teach me more of real life experience knowledge, like wisdom with work. Because in the beginning, it was just a theory. So as I accumulated experience directly working with people with cancer, then I had to just put my second book on hold. Like, whoa, I have to speak about this now. I can't just write book 2 without talking about that.
Right.
And then it's like, whoa, I have to put this on hold because I also have to speak about this. And now I had to just actually just throw the whole book 2 out.
Wow.
I had to just start over. Because I started to understand something very different about cancer. So in my first book, I'm talking about how stress causes cancer. And I noticed when I was doing my own personal research that cancer cells are not just this random cell, like the medical system says it is.
Yeah.
All cancer cells have specific qualities. And one main quality, which has become much more known today, and I think my book had an impact at least on why this is known, because I explained this in my book, and that was back in 2012 when I started sharing this, is that, but I'm not just the only source of it, but I really think I contributed to this.
You're one of people.
Yeah.
Got it.
That cancer cells absorb huge amounts of glucose. Always. And in fact, that's how oncologists oftentimes scan a person for cancer. They inject radioactive sugar into the bloodstream. If they have cancer, the tumor or wherever the cancer will absorb that glucose in huge amounts. And then when you scan them, you can see right exactly where the cancer is. So it's a diagnostic tool based on this quality of cancer. Well, that's a little odd, don't you think? Like, if it's just a random mutated cell, then you just have all these random qualities, not the same quality all the time. And another quality with cancer is that it always produces lactic acid as a byproduct of its metabolism. So one of the painful realities that people with cancer can face in the end is that they can have a lot of lactic acid. If the cancer is progressing and increasing, they'll have more lactic acid building in their body, and they have to go and get it drained. Like, you can
Which also be incredibly painful too.
Super painful. Right. It was really uncomfortable. So they get 2 liters of lactic acid drained, or 3 liters, or 4 liters. It's really difficult experience.
Got it.
So that was what I shared about in my first book. And my theory was that there's got to be a purpose to cancer. It's not just showing up randomly. There's got to be some purpose, you know. And I would love to talk about the purpose of symptoms in our body and why they're there at some point if we have time.
Yeah.
But so my theory was that it's not just some random thing, it's there for some kind of a reason, and it's there in association with stress. So I explain in my book in great detail, and there's some really important information in there in general. But just to sum up, the one point I want to make is that I knew that a lot of the diets of people today are not healthy. And one of the things that's not healthy to consume is refined sugar. And it's in it's in so many things. Refined sugar's into so many things. Like a can of pop is 10 teaspoons of refined sugar. And, but as I was like investigating and trying to figure this out, I then also realized something else, which was like a game changer for me in my book, which is that when we experience the fight or flight response, which is related to psycho-emotional stress,
Right.
that causes triggers our body to release a surge of glucose.
Interesting.
Like, whoa. So we've got like the average person eating way too much glucose and having sugar surges in their blood.
Mm-hmm.
And the average person is experiencing psycho-emotional stress related to whatever. And that's causing surges in the blood of sugar. And then it's true, like it's factual that high amounts of glucose in the blood, when it's in contact with our cells, destroys our cells. Like it causes a lot of damage. It dehydrates our cells, and when our cells are dehydrated, they're cooked. You know, like so. I theorized that the purpose of cancer then is the body's building this in response to this damage that's occurring to us.
So it could lend a little bit of credence to the idea, which is another sort of holistic, natural health idea for what cancer actually is that it's the body packaging up toxicity and putting it to one area so it doesn't leach into other areas in the body. Because people then describe, right, especially in the holistic health space, people will say, like, if you suspect you might have cancer, do not go get a biopsy, because if you get a biopsy, they're going to rip that open and it's just going to leach that toxicity into the rest of your body. And you hear stories of that happening to people. I would say enough anecdotal stories to where it's like, this is pretty interesting. Like, I think you get what I'm getting at there, right?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think there's an important there's a correlation, but I don't think that's what's happening.
Got it.
Yeah.
Are you saying specifically with biopsies or?
Yeah,
okay,
with biopsies, because I haven't got to what my explanation for what cancer is, like what I believe it is now. And once I explain that, then it kind of explains why I don't think that's how it works. But yeah, so what you mentioned there is a different theory, which I've heard, which there's a lot of logic, and I understand why people would think that. And there's some value in it too, but also I disagree with it.
I threw it in there because I knew that wasn't the approach that you like, but I'm like, that is a big common one amongst
and I have so much respect for it, because it
makes sense logically, right?
Yeah,
like it really does, because if your body is struggling to get rid of whether it's physical or emotional toxicity, like an amalgamation of the two, depending on the individual's unique constitution, your detox pathways are not operating correctly, then it's just going to store it in one area of the body and it's going to dissolve there somehow. That's the one part that I don't
it's
understand.
logical.
Yeah.
It's logical.
Yeah.
And I like it and my original theory, because these types of theories are about personal responsibility, which is what the medical system doesn't focus on, right? The medical system's focused on them as being responsible for solving our problem, which is, I think, really a big problem.
100%.
They can show up in important ways to be helpful, for sure. Like, I've seen clients that have a tumor blocking their colon, they cannot defecate, and that's a death sentence, really. Yeah. And if it wasn't for the medical system's ability to go in there and surgically remove that tumor like super fast, they would have died. And I can give more examples of how the medical system can show up and save people's lives.
Totally.
So
emergency and acute
important
situations, allopathic medicine is great.
But one of the issues is that there is a heavy focus on them being responsible for us. And if that's the focus, that can turn into a death sentence, really, because we have to be responsible for ourselves. So like these theories, my original one, the toxicity one, then
So that was largely yours originally as well.
No. My theory was just that the tumor is a special construction from the body built to protect us, to absorb these surges in sugar.
Got it.
So that damage does not continue in parts of our body.
So it's similar but different in respect to specifically
it's not
related
to
glucose
toxicity,
and
though.
sugar. Okay,
yeah, it's glucose.
Got it. Okay.
Right? And then there's some consequences to it, because when that glucose is metabolized, it releases lactic acid, which isn't ideal, but that's better than the body just having parts of it shut down and die from the consequences of these surges of blood glucose. Right? So that was my theory. But then as the years went on, so basically what I was telling people is you got to reduce your blood sugar surges, which occur from the stresses in your life. So you got to like resolve this challenge, your relationship challenges, your money challenge, whatever it is. And you got to clean up your diet and get rid of all the things that cause blood sugar spikes from what you're eating. And there's lots. So definitely it was sending people in the right direction. But as the years went on, I ended up having several different experiences that started to challenge my theory there of what cancer is experientially. And that was a little bit of a crisis for me at first, because like, I was so sure I had that right.
Yeah.
And part of my ego was like, really wanted to hold on to just being right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not my devotion. You know, my devotion is to figure out what the truth is, you know?
Good for you,
that's what
man.
I want.
Because there's a lot of people in the holistic health space who latch on to something, and then when they're presented with new information, they refuse to even look at it.
Yeah.
They just like logical fallacy it away and get it out of their field of view.
Yeah.
And just clinch onto that thing, whether it's for financial reasons or egoic reasons, or they don't want to have to go back to the people they were working with previously and be like, hey, dude, I was actually wrong on this.
Right.
It takes a lot to be able to be like, you know what, I was incorrect, and I've now come to understand it's this way.
Yeah. Thanks for acknowledging
I have a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It can be hard because we like start to form an identity around things, and we become very invested in things for reasons like you're sharing.
Totally.
So,
continue on. Yeah.
But we got to keep growing and trust that the new truth that we've realized that will be a path that will unfold. Like, we don't have to be attached to the one path we're on. It's not like everything comes to an end.
Right.
Keep evolving, you know?
Right.
And that's what ended up happening. So one of the first things that occurred for me is that I started to come across something called black salve, because my clients would share this with me. I'm like, well, what is this? And it's a paste. One of its primary ingredients is bloodroot. And they said to me that they want to use black salve. And I'm like, can I observe this? Like, I want to see how this works. So I got a chance to see this. And it blew my mind. But before I finish the story, I really want to share that I am not promoting black salve. It's not a solution. Okay. But I want to explain how this actually works, though, based on my experience. Black salve, you put this on a tumor, the whole tumor dies in 24 hours. And I've never seen it not work. It doesn't matter if the tumor is like where it is. You put it on, that tumor dies. It turns black, and it's astonishing, but it reveals the roots of the tumor. You can see now, because it all turns black, even the roots. And so you can have, like, a person can have a lump under their skin, and you can see that lump. But when you put black salve on it and it dies, then all the roots that are branching off and going to different parts in the area all turn black as well, and you can see them through the skin. And that was the first thing that started to challenge my theory.
Whoa.
Because I'm like, why would there be roots growing off this thing? And also, why would a particular, like, blood root and the other ingredients, why would this cause it to die like that so fast? So then I thought, oh my God, I've just had someone share with me what a real cure for cancer is. Like, I mean, it just killed the whole tumor. And then within days, that tumor grew back right to the same size. So the first experience I had was a golf ball sized tumor. And it was about 4 days, that size completely grew back.
Wow.
And then it stopped. So when it reached that size, then it stopped growing.
Wow.
And I'm like, what the heck's going on? So I ended up meeting a guy named Doug Kaufman. I was invited to the Cure to Cancer conference. I started doing like speaking engagements, and I was invited one year to the Cure to Cancer conference in San Diego. And there's a guy, lots of different people there speaking, like people like some well-known names like Ty Bollinger and Chris Wark and others.
Chris Wark is the Chris cured cancer guys, or Chris killed.
Yeah.
What is it again? Chris killed cancer.
Chris beat cancer.
Chris beat cancer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And his main focus back then when I met him was on like changing your diet. You know,
has he shifted?
I think he's shifted into
emotions.
I don't have a personal connection with him. So, like that's the only time I ever connected with him back then. I think he's gone deeper now into emotional and spiritual stuff.
Got it.
But I'm not totally sure.
Cool. Cool.
So at that conference, there was a heavy focus on building the strength of our immune system and like, you know, dietary things, detoxification. I was there though, speaking about stress. And then there was Doug Kaufman, who was saying cancer is a fungus. And I'm like, cancer's not a fungus. But him and I got along really well. And he loved what I was sharing, my experiences with people with cancer, and he loved the fact that I was saying we got to get glucose under control in our body, because it turns out fungus absorbs glucose. So you see, my theory was that the body's creating a special like tumor. It has a purpose, and it's to absorb this glucose to protect us. But now Doug is sharing with me that fungus absorbs glucose. Then, interestingly enough, fungus also produces lactic acid. So my theory started shifting and changing. How could I explain this next? I eventually started to realize that it's not just stress in our life, it's specifically emotional suppression. So stress doesn't cause cancer. And I was kind of thinking that way back in the beginning. So you can go through stress and not develop cancer. But if you go through stress and begin to suppress emotions related to it, then you might develop cancer.
Chronic stress.
Yeah. Yeah. So gradually I started to discover the energy field of the body. And the energy field of the body is where our emotions are carried, is where they exist. Right? So we've got our physical body, but then we have an energy body, which is real. It's not like some kind of philosophy. Yeah. But the human biofield. So if I were to become angry or happy, my energy state, literally the energy flowing through me and around me, through me as well, is going to change to either positive or negative. And that energy field has an impact on our physical cells. So if you've got anger flowing through your body, through a region of your body, because it's in your energy field, it's going to have a detrimental effect on our cells. But what has a much worse effect on our cells is if we suppress the anger, for example, in this one example. Because when suppression occurs, I think what happens is the part of our energy field becomes blocked. So, you know, like, let's say I'm angry and I just want to like say something, but I block it, right? Like I can not say it. It's real for me. That energy is inside me, but I'm not going to release it. So the energy is like stuck, right? So as I proceeded, I started to realize that energy can get stuck in different places. It doesn't just get stuck like that's a general statement, right? But it can actually get stuck in different places. And then I started, and what I think is happening is energy can get stuck. It's completely scientific. I started to make correlations between the cardiac plexus of the body. And a cardiac plexus is a condensed branch of nerves that comes out from the spinal cord that's connected to our brain. So our brain comes out, like one example is the cardiac plexus. So our spinal cord comes down, a condensed network of nerves comes out and branches out and feeds our heart, our breast, and our lungs. if we're experiencing psychological stress or emotional stress related to love, the stress impacts the organs on the cardiac plexus. But it doesn't flow through the other plexuses. So stress related to, for example, money is a very different stress related to love. Like if I have emotional pain or stress about money versus love, it's two different things. So different networks of nerves carry the stress based on the theme.
I wonder if there's a lot of crossover with your framework, because we're going to get into some of the specificity of different cancers and the stress related to that specific cancer. But have you looked at how much traditional Chinese medicine overlaps with yours?
Yeah.
Does it quite a bit?
It does.
Wow.
Yeah. Traditional Chinese
brought
medicine.
Up the heart, and I know in traditional Chinese medicine, I have it here in front of me because I was, as I was reviewing for this podcast, I was thinking that like, wow, this seems similar to traditional Chinese medicine. The heart in TCM is stress related to emotional upset, grief, and sadness. So that's what's linked to the heart meridian.
Yep. And that, I would say that's true based on my experience. Traditional Chinese medicine is the one thing out there that aligns with what I've experienced over these years the most.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool to hear. That's really cool to hear.
Yeah. It's like sort of confirmation for me too, in a certain way, But the real confirmation for me was already there because I'm at the point now, like this has been 16 years, where I've been mapping the what's been going on in a person's life. And it has revealed to me patterns that I could not ignore. So, for example, if we continue with the cardiac plexus, that involves the lungs. And what I started experiencing is when someone would come to me to see if I could help who had lung cancer, and then I would look into the stress in their life, I would just ask a general question, what's one of the biggest stresses you've experienced recently? Now, with other clients, they might say, like with different cancers, they might say, like, I'm really stressed about money. I'm really stressed about my kid, really, whatever. Lots of different stresses, right? But every time I would talk to someone who had lung cancer, they would say, I've experienced stress related to someone. I've had a significant loss, like a major loss.
Also Chinese medicine.
Yes, also Chinese medicine. And I didn't even know Chinese medicine at this time.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so the most common that I would see, I thought I had actually figured that out at a certain time because every time I was encountering someone with lung cancer, they would share with me that someone had died in their life sometime before. And it could be like it could be months before or a year before. And I've seen examples where it's like 5 years before. But how I know it's still correlated is because if I talk to them about that death, they start crying.
Right.
Like, so clearly it's still
the
something
suppression of
present.
The chronic.
Yes, they've been carrying that pain. Right. It's suppressed inside them. It's still present. Like if you talk to someone who has experienced a death and they are calm, not suppressed, then that's, generally that's probably resolved. But if someone starts crying, obviously it's not, So then I'm thinking, okay, it's always related to death. But then I started to experience clients who had lung cancer that no one had died. And I thought, okay, well, what the heck? But then I ended up discovering that they still experienced a significant loss, like a life dream gone.
Got it.
One time.
So it doesn't have to be the loss of an individual; it could be the loss of something.
Yeah.
Got it.
One time I had a guy, for example, his entire life dream was to be self-sustaining and to live out remote. He grew his own fruits and vegetables. He had his own animals. He built his house. He had solar panels, everything. And long story short, because of some complicated stuff in his relationship, he had to let it go. And, well, his partner didn't want it. They wanted to live in the city.
Kept the partner, lost the dream.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they wanted to live in the city. He hated the city. He walked away from that dream, and that dream took him years, too. He saved up for that place. It took him years to build those places. When they sold the place, which was him going against his heart, the people that came in and purchased the place started tearing shit down. So it's a major grief.
Yeah.
So it's not the death of a person, but it's the death of a dream.
Yeah.
Right. So then I realized it's still the same thing. So in 16 years, I've never seen someone with lung cancer that didn't have some kind of loss. So in that way, that's happened with me with all the other cancers, essentially, like breast cancer, colon cancer. So I've mapped them all in that way. And yeah, it lines up with traditional Chinese medicine a lot. Chinese medicine, I can't find what they teach about certain parts of the body, but I have my own discovery for that. But since my discoveries line up with theirs of what I can find in TCM, then I have confidence in my other explanations for the other parts of the body. I
can find you a resource.
Like brain cancer, for example.
One of my good friends is a TCM practitioner. So,
okay, yeah. I'd be interested. Yeah,
I'll link you up with her. So before we continue on, because there's so many things that I want to poke at in this conversation, because this is obviously a very big one, especially because nowadays, according to mainstream sources, and you tell me if this is accurate, an estimated 2 million new cancer cases are diagnosed each year in the United States. I'm sure it's a crazy figure when you look at the entire world. So needless to say, this is a very, very big topic that is relevant to a lot of people. I mean, everyone either has experienced it themselves or knows someone around them at this point who has had cancer. So it's a very big topic. And I just want to give some high-level stats before we continue on this conversation. So from 2000 till now, there's been a significant increase. I think it's 36.3% rise over the last 2 decades in the number of cancers that occur each year, which is insane. And I don't know for sure if that statistic is accurate, but that's what I found online. But the other thing that's crazy to me is that in one fiscal year, the United States, both private and public funding sources, spends upwards of $20 billion on cancer research on a yearly basis. And so despite that increase in spending on cancer research, cancer rates seem to be skyrocketing, although they'll say, statistically speaking, cancer mortality rates are going down. But I wonder if that's because it's simply a matter of math relative to how the rates are skyrocketing, but the mortality rates themselves may not be skyrocketing. So then mortality rates relative to the actual cancer rates themselves may look like there's a decrease in mortality, if you get what I'm saying. But I don't think that mortality rates are truly going down by any means either.
I don't think so either.
Right.
No.
So
there's something else important there I want to add.
Yeah, please.
At some point in this war on cancer, they decided that they would narrow down how long they would track the results of treatments. So they narrowed it down to 5 years.
Wow.
So if someone's diagnosed with cancer, 5 years later, if they're still alive, they're recorded as a statistical cancer survivor.
Insane.
Yeah. So if they have cancer, but they're alive, they're a cancer survivor. Now, if they die 5 years and 1 day later, or any time after that, they're still recorded as a cancer survivor.
Dude, that's insane.
And
so it's like fudging the numbers, essentially.
Perhaps.
You could say.
Yeah. I mean, and also the emphasis on getting diagnosed sooner has increased massively, right? So if you can, if a person gets diagnosed with cancer when it's like stage 3, and then dies within that 5-year window, then obviously there wasn't a success. We must not really understand cancer or how to actually solve the problem.
Right.
But if you have someone diagnosed at stage 1, where it's just a tiny little thing, and then you apply the same exact treatments and approaches, and they're alive 5 years later, now it looks like it's a success. But then if they reach stage 3 and then die afterwards, obviously it wasn't a success, and we must not really understand cancer, you know?
Right.
So I think it's called lead bias.
Yeah. And then when you look at chemotherapy drugs, correct me if I'm wrong on this, and I've said this before, so I definitely want you to correct me if I'm wrong. There are some chemotherapy drugs that are really just repurposed World War II chemical weapons.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the first chemos that were created were basically derivatives of mustard gas from the war. So we're talking toxic stuff. Like,
Right.
and it's oftentimes when someone has chemotherapy, there's a port put in their, somewhere around their chest area because it's got to get close to the heart. That's why it's put there, because the heart has some of the biggest arteries, and they're the thickest. So if you inject the poison there, it doesn't dissolve that tube, like the artery, and the blood can then carry the poison like all throughout the body, and then hopefully have most of an effect on the tumor and not the rest of the body. But if they found that if they put chemotherapy in like the arm, then it just dissolves all the arteries in the arm, and it doesn't work. So that's why a port is commonly put near the heart. It's dangerous stuff. But
it literally sounds insane. Like if you think of it objectively without the societal conditioning, it sounds insane.
I want to add something here though, with some humbleness here, because when I first started out, I was really upset about like chemotherapy and the whole approach to cancer, because I had people die that used it. Obviously it didn't work long term. But as the years went on and I worked with people, I had to also surrender my ego to the fact that, and I now understand why oncologists, nurse doctors see importance and value in it, because I've seen tumors destroyed. I've had clients that have a huge lump on their neck. They start chemotherapy, the lump shrinks in days. You know, that's a good thing. I mean, it's not addressing the root cause though. This is super important. Because,
and it can be toxic in many cases as well.
Then there's all the side effects, right? There's things called chemo brain. A lot of people aren't even told this. I've talked to lots of clients, they're not even told all the side effects. They're not even really prepared. And there's long-term side effects that never go away. I've connected to cancer groups where everyone's like basically damaged for life, and they get together to kind of like support each other. They're alive, but like they've lost important functions. It's not always the case. Anyways, I've seen cancer tumors destroyed by chemotherapy. But I've also seen their cancer come back 1 month later. So it's like the weed analogy I shared, you know? So sometimes it's important to get that freaking tumor shrunk or gone so that you can maybe focus on the real resolution, which is deeper stuff that we're talking about. So I can see why there's value. But the real issue is that it's not addressing the root. That's why cancer comes back. One of the most common stories that people don't really aren't really aware of is that, like, you see someone saying, "Yeah, I just succeeded with my treatments and it's great," but you might not hear 2 years later it's metastasized, it's come back. You know, so it's important to be aware of that. So you got to do the root cause work.
What is your opinion of mammograms and biopsies?
I want to answer that in a certain way that I think will be more valuable. Our human body is designed to protect us. So we already have a detection system. Like, I mean, like anywhere from if a mosquito bites you, you're going to have a message that comes from the body to say there's a problem, right? And it comes in the form of pain, because this isn't okay. Someone's crossing your boundaries. If you eat the wrong food, you might get the message that something's wrong because you're bloated or because you have bad bowel movement. If you're moving in the wrong direction in life in some way, if you're suppressing emotions, if chronic stress is, you know, something's not resolved, then you're going to have pain, like back pain, joint pain, migraines maybe, or a lump. So I don't even have a doctor. Like for 30 years now, I've not seen a doctor. I don't have
either.
One. Yeah.
Dude, I haven't had to fill out any forms for anything recently, but I always find it so funny when I am filling out the occasional form for something and they ask like for my primary physician. I literally just like make one up because I don't have one. I don't have a primary physician. Like that concept is so foreign to me now.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think it can be a problem. So perhaps there's some value though. Like I had someone share with me the other day that they went and had a mammogram, and they did it as a routine check. They didn't think anything was wrong, and the mammogram showed this little spot, you know. But
But
so
how accurate are they though, too?
that's the thing.
Honestly.
That's the thing. Lumps come and go.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people don't. One of the studies I reference in my book, if I remember right, I wrote it so long ago, is that I think it's called the China study.
Yeah.
But they followed something like 10,000 people over the course of 7 years, and a huge percentage of them had cancer come and go. And they didn't even know.
Well, think about the psychological, like, fuckery, for lack of a better term, forgive my language, of that, where it's like, I don't feel like there's anything wrong. And maybe I'll ask your opinion on what occurs in this case, but okay, you don't feel like anything is that wrong with you, but you're like, oh, because the mainstream says I have to go get this routine checkup, whether it's a colonoscopy or whether it's, you know, a prostate exam or whether it's a mammogram of some type, I'm going to go do it. And then they quote, find cancer. And then the psychological sort of damage there, especially if they're not understanding of what you teach or what anyone teaches with respect to the emotional and chronic stress related to health, is only going to exacerbate the issue or present issues in other areas, in my opinion. And so, like, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Maybe, and this is according to your paradigm that I'm speaking from. So if someone has a mammogram and they find a little tiny thing that comes up on the mammogram that's like, oh, you might have the beginning stages, stage 1, stage 2 of some form of breast cancer. It's that they may have had some chronic stress, just a little tiny bit of chronic stress related to whatever it is for breast cancer. We'll get into that later, that appeared. And a lot of people do, without even realizing it, end up addressing that chronic stress, like that little tiny bit of chronic stress that may have had for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. It ends up going away. They do end up resolving the issue. So it's going to go away on its own. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, there's a good chance that would happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting at. And that's where I'm like, when I look at these things, I'm like, God dang, it can be incredibly psychologically damaging.
Yeah.
But I could see possibly where for some, if they have the understanding of the emotional aspects of health, I would argue the emotional foundations of health, maybe it could be, okay, that might be what my emotional stuff is related to. It's going to check out there. But like you're saying, which I totally agree, our bodies already have this innate warning system or alarm system in symptomology as it is. And I think maybe that's a good thing to discuss now, is just your general take on symptoms, especially since you brought it up earlier, what you think symptoms are.
Yeah, that's a good next step. Yeah.
At this point in history, community is essential. And as the world shifts in ways we never imagined, finding spaces that foster true connection with like-minded people is more important than ever. Join us this year for our 3rd annual Confluence Festival, May 7th through the 12th in Bandera, Texas. Confluence is a transformational gathering where a like-minded community comes together on a stunning regenerative farm just outside of San Antonio, offering the perfect opportunity to connect deeply with nature, paradigm-shifting knowledge, and one another. With multiple offerings running simultaneously, Confluence features a dynamic mix of lectures, workshops, live music, movement classes, and more, covering topics from circadian biology and consciousness to dome building and regenerative agriculture. Attendees are encouraged to CYOA, choose your own adventure, ensuring a truly personalized experience. This year, we are so stoked to welcome Dr. Diane Hennessy-Powell, a leading neuroscientist featured in the viral Telepathy Tapes podcast series, sharing her research on the science of telepathy and expanded consciousness. Dr. Gerald Pollack will reveal his groundbreaking work on the 4th phase of water, reshaping how we understand biology and energy. We'll also be joined by Dr. Kelly Brogan, Eileen McCusick, Veda Austin, Tom Barnett, and many, many more incredible workshop leaders and lecturers. Plus, we'll have live musical performances from Lincoln Jesser, Headflux, DJ Mike Winter, Joel Raffiti, and several other incredible musicians and performers. And when it comes to nourishment, we believe food is medicine. I promise you will not find better food at any event you attend. The full-scale restaurant on site serves farm-to-table meals with ingredients grown and raised right on the property or sourced from local farms, providing a deeply nourishing experience for both body and spirit. And our event accommodations are designed for every comfort level. Camp under the stars, stay in a cozy tiny home, enjoy luxurious glamping, or park your RV. If you prefer a hotel, we've got you covered with nearby hotel options as well. And your whole family is welcome. Our unschooling village, led by experienced guides, provides engaging activities for kids aged 2 through 12, ensuring that parents can fully immerse themselves in the experience while their little ones learn and play in a supportive environment. Come be a part of an unforgettable event surrounded by like-minded community where we gather in celebration of health, freedom, and coherence. Visit confluenceevent.com or head to the show notes to learn more and reserve your spot today.
Well, symptoms are, like, from a spiritual perspective, let's say they're there to protect us. As soon as a symptom arises in our body, it's letting us know that either one of our needs is not being fulfilled. Mm-hmm. Like if we're dehydrated, maybe we'll have a headache because one of our needs is water, hydration. Mm. And then we can have symptoms occur because of psycho-emotional stress. Mm. So then,
would you say some symptoms are detoxification though too?
Yeah, they're minor though. I think it's minor. The detoxification process is pretty short-lived. Mm-hmm. Like it depends, but
like a runny nose, cold, cough, diarrhea, throwing up. Do you think that those are? Because that's how I describe them. And if I'm wrong, like that's totally fine. If
yeah, absolutely. That's the body doing what it has to do, what it knows to do to attempt to at least rectify a situation.
Right.
Like get things out that aren't supposed to be there.
Right.
Yeah. And so in the medical system, the focus is kind of like something's wrong with the body and we have to fix it.
Yeah.
Right. Like
broken, needs fixing.
Yeah. And so the foundation of all symptoms is, generally speaking, inflammation. Some kind of a damage occurs to us, to our body, then it's going to become inflamed. And that's happening for a reason. There's nothing wrong with the body. So it doesn't have to be fixed. And that's what a lot of drugs are for, is to just shut those symptoms down, shut them off. And that can be a big problem. So the important thing that I teach is that we need to know how to appropriately respond to the symptoms. And so we need to ask ourselves, this is like one of the most important things that people are generally not taught. If a symptom appears in your body, the first thing you should do is not run outside yourself to try to find something that's going to solve the problem. I'm talking about alternative things too. Don't go and try to find some kind of supplement or whatever either. Or, don't go outside. First, reflect and ask yourself, what has been going on inside myself or my life, physical, emotional, spiritual, that has caused this symptom? Because something has caused it for sure, inside yourself or in your life. And if you don't look there, then how are you going to address the root of it? Because that's the root of it, right? And what most people do because of our programming is run to the medical, or if you've kind of entered into the alternative, like you've woken up a bit, then you go to the alternative. Yeah. But all of that stuff has value. It can have value. But it needs. I look at it as supportive. Mm. And if the root isn't resolved, then what's supportive can actually just fail too. Mm. So the thing where people, I think, kind of get caught up, which I've seen a lot since 2020 with like the awakening that's happened, and a lot of people are really realizing, stop seeing symptoms as a bad thing. This is how the body works. People can start to think that there is no problem. Mm. And that can be a problem because we can have symptoms appear, especially with cancer, right? So when cancer appears in our body, it's never a sign that the body is healing.
That flies in the face of German new medicine, which we'll talk about later.
I realize that.
Yeah.
There's lots of issues I have with German new medicine, but I do have some respect for Hammer and his the main thing that I like about Hammer, the one thing, which is a big deal to me, and I think it's a big deal, is that Hammer realized that there is an association between what's going on in a person's life and the symptoms that appear in their body. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's a leap ahead of the medical system, right? The medical
And
system
he
doesn't
related
really...
back to emotions as well, specifically.
Yeah.
Conflicts.
From there, I have lots of issues with it, but I just got to say I respect Homer, and it sends people in the right direction, at least. Yeah. But, well, yeah, so that's one of the dangers, I think. There is a dangerous teaching involved in GNM. I would say it's truly dangerous to think that when a tumor appears, or, for example, blood is appearing or pain is occurring, that's a sign that you're healing. And that's a really big problem. It's never a sign in the case of cancer. In all of my experience with cancer, if a person starts to experience pain in their lump, for example, that means things are getting worse, not better. Never. There's no exceptions to that.
GNM would call that the healing phase.
Yeah, they'd say it's a healing phase. And it goes back, it's backwards. Like when our body is healing, symptoms diminish.
Got it.
That's how it works, you know?
Real quick, and I'll just share my experience on this just to push back a little bit. And this isn't necessarily GNM, but I'm thinking back to my water fast period, right? When I did a water fast, and maybe it's different when it comes to cancer. I don't know. So when I did a water fast, day 3, day 4, I did not have a rash on my armpit starting the water fast on either side. Day 3, 4, 5, I had major rashes appear on both sides of my armpits, which I instantly became aware of at that time. Oh, this is my body. Now that my body's not having to use energy to digest food, now diverting more energy towards detoxification. And it was so itchy and painful, and I'm sure I could think of several other examples too, where at first it did seem like it was getting worse, but then it got better. Then all that toxicity cleared out, and the whites of my eyes cleared up. My skin was looking incredibly rejuvenated, and everyone was commenting on how much younger I looked after the fast. This is by day 15 when I finished it. But my point is, it did seem to get worse before it got better. And I've had that experience with, acute situations of detoxification, like having way worse diarrhea, and then it eventually got better. So yeah, your response to that.
Yeah. The body has to move through this inflammatory response when damage has occurred. So it does have to go through that. So if you were to hit your finger with a hammer, then you're going to go through some pain for X number of days. The pain could increase too. The next day, it could hurt more than the first day. And then there's going to be swelling, etc. And then eventually it's going to fade away.
Got it. Because
the body has to move through that process. So with your fasting, it could be different reasons could cause that. For example, maybe you're starting to your energy system's accessing more of your detoxification system. Your less energy is going into other things, and so now you can start mobilizing some toxins that are in your body, and so it sort of upregulates that. And then you see the symptoms of that healing process occurring. Or you might have been accessing something emotional, because oftentimes with fasting,
100%, 100%. Because I want to talk about water fasting as it relates to cancer later, because I've heard a lot of claims on that.
Yeah, so there's some truth to that, and that's what I find with GNM is that there's some truth in it, and then there's something not quite right about it. And that's what I hear from a lot of people too. A lot of people feel intuitively like, yeah, there's some really good logic and truth here, but something doesn't quite feel right.
Let's just talk about GNM since we're already there. We're already there. We've already said it so much.
Well, actually, did I finish? I don't know if I finished our first talk about what cancer is, because you said
it's a fungus. You said you think that it's a fungus.
Yeah, there's one other thing I want to add there to complete that. Why it's a fungus, how that appears. But yeah, then we can come back to German new medicine. And also the last thing there is I was saying, so I agree that sometimes symptoms can appear because we're moving through the inflammatory process, which involves pain, swelling, redness, itchiness in general, and we're mobilizing toxins out, cells are being repaired. So that's always part of the inflammatory process. But in the case of cancer, when a tumor is growing or pain is occurring, it's always a sign that things are getting worse. I've never seen it any different than that. And the reason I really want to emphasize that is because I've had people contact me on their deathbed, stage 4, now nothing can be done. And they've shared with me that they believed that their body was healing because of these types of teachings. And I have to tell them, I'm sorry, but that was not correct.
Yeah. Because I could be totally wrong on this. I do not claim to be an expert of Germany medicine by any means. But from my understanding, they would just say that that was a healing conflict that was way too hard on the body. And ultimately, that's just what happened.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong on that. So I know there's German new medicine people that listen to this podcast. Please don't freak out on me.
I've heard something like that too. I think it might be referred to an epileptoid crisis. And which I don't think applies either. There's errors in that too. Because when these theories, like I find that German medicine is a lot of theories, like theories upon theories upon theories, and they sort of try to make up for the errors in the ones that came before them. Right? So if someone, like just the theory that it's a special biological program, which I disagree with. I think how the body works is we have an inflammatory response. It's kind of simple. Like if we have damage done somewhere, a body must become inflamed, repair the damage, and move on, right? If it can't repair, or if the damage being done is like psycho-emotional and it's related to suppression, then it can't complete the process of repair. Or if we're continuously exposed to toxins, then we're just going to continuously be inflamed. It's like, it's no longer a sign that the body's healing. Now the body's trying to heal, but can't succeed.
So is it because you would then say, because you're getting in the way of the body healing because you are not addressing the true root cause?
Yeah, you're getting in the way, or you don't understand what the root of it is. So you're still in the environment, or you're still in the relationship challenge, or you're still in suppression.
So you could say you're ignoring the warning signs, essentially.
Yeah, that can happen.
Yeah.
That's part of suppression, is to ignore it.
Okay.
Yeah, because
ignoring or suppressing the warning signs.
Also, one of the biggest problems with cancer is that we're not prepared in a way to truly be able to prevent cancer, because it's a psycho-emotional based thing. The average person, we're not taught in school the tools to navigate life. We're not taught in school how to deal with our emotions. If anything, in school, we're taught to suppress them. Right? Like, you don't want to go to school? Suppress that. Go. Anyways. Right? And we could do a whole podcast on school, but we're not taught
Luckily,
the
I've
tools.
done other ones that are pretty good too, that relate to this.
Okay.
So, yeah.
This is one of the things that I focus on in my course. I have 2 levels of depth in understanding cancer and how to prevent it, how to reverse it, and other diseases. And one of the main things in my first training is the tools, the psycho-emotional tools to navigate life successfully. So if you run into a challenge related to sex, which happens for lots of people, that was not taught. Where did we learn how to deal with that? No. How do we process our emotions? What's the truth? How do we grow through this? How do we respond? So a lot of people end up with suppressed emotions related to that. If we run into a challenge related to money or survival, if we run into a family challenge, if we run into a love challenge, sex and love are different. If we run into there's a lot like existential challenge, like the meaning of life. There's lots of stuff. So we got to have the tools. So the reason I'm bringing that up is because it's not just that a person is blocking it or denying it or not taking responsibility. By and large, we're not
aware,
prepared.
Yeah.
We don't have the awareness.
Right.
Yeah. Like lots of times when, like with lung cancer, when someone dies, the average person does not have the tools to know how to truly, properly grieve, so that becomes a resolved experience in their heart.
Yeah.
Most people really don't know how to do that. There's all kinds of unhealthy ways that people use to try to respond to that run in families too. Like, oh, this is what you need to do. Like, just move on.
Right. Yeah. Just
like,
move
just
on.
with your mind, like, let it go. You got to move on. There's the future matters. No, there's a lot of pain that has to be processed. So these tools are important. Yeah.
Back to Germany medicine just real quick, and I've shared this with you before. So I've shared this on other episodes. I believe it's episode 84 with Brandon Bozarth, where he has his own nuanced take to Germany medicine, which I really appreciate because it is nuanced. Basically saying that it's not as absolute in concrete. And I don't want to quote Brandon, say that he said that as a quote, but that's my takeaway from the episode. And I was very pleased with it because I found that Germany medicine in many ways, I've found so many examples of inconsistencies with it. Maybe this is a good time if you could just share briefly. Testicular cancer in Germany medicine is supposedly related to a loss, but I don't know if you say
I've
this.
Never seen that.
Yeah.
So in 16 years of focusing on that, I've never seen that. So perhaps it could happen, but that's not what I teach in my training. Also, Germany medicine says that lung cancer can be caused from being afraid of dying.
Yeah,
I've never once seen that either. And that doesn't line up with traditional Chinese medicine either.
It's interesting. Sorry, I was just going to go ahead real quick. Despite that, I have had examples in my own experience where Germany medicine has lined up, while acknowledging that I've had some that did not line up for me at all. And what Germany medicine, not all, but some Germany medicine proponents and practitioners will do is they'll say, "Are you sure you didn't have a loss? You're sure. Was it a dog? Was it this? Was it that?" Like they dig. And then what I've literally heard some people say, for if an individual's like, "I literally do not have an example in this case of loss in my life," they'll be like, "Okay, you're lying to yourself then. You had to have had some loss, or you're just not aware of the loss," which like to me seems incredibly disingenuous. And all that is context. I will say in my own experience, I've had some accuracies. For example, like right now I have a little bit of bumps on my face on the right side. I'm left-handed. Germany medicine, right side is my mother's side. And I had some stress related to my mother within the last week. So it's pretty interesting. And then before I even knew that this was the case, my mom and I, when we became estranged and no longer spoke with each other, in Germany medicine, skin issues is related to a separation conflict where you're either too close to someone you want to be separate from, so you want distance from them, or the other way around. You're separate from someone that you want to be close to. So when my mom and I became estranged, that conflict lasted for quite some time. And I had this rash that only came up on the right side of my body, on my forehead, right here, that was coming and going every time I would get stress related to my mom. Stress resolved, then for a few days, the rash would come up. And then if I would get triggered again, the rash wasn't there, but then a few days later, it would come back up again. And it was coming, going until I have learned mostly, clearly not completely, according to Germany medicine, to resolve this. But again, lots of stuff related to my mom that I don't necessarily want to get into because it would derail the conversation, make it quite complex. But the point is, I have found it to be accurate in many ways. So I just love to hear your response to all that I just said.
Yeah, I've seen that too, that sometimes Germany medicine has some, it lines up with what I've experienced and what I'm teaching in a certain way, and sometimes not. So, and sometimes I'm really clear that it's not, like death fright with lungs and testicular cancer loss. What I explain with the skin is that it's a boundary issue. So someone's crossing your boundaries.
Makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Because in these cases with my mom, it was, there are lots of boundary crossings. So it makes sense.
So, but I see the value in Hammer's explanation, which is that it's a separation conflict. And what I would say is, like, in order to resolve it, you've got to have safety in your approximation with them, like in your distance. Like, you either like resolve this with her, so her she's no longer crossing your boundaries, or you would separate enough that you're no longer exposed to that treatment.
Got it.
Right. So now your boundaries aren't being crossed, and then you'd solve the problem. And then the reason it shows up on the skin is not because of a special biological program where there's this purpose. Like, what I believe has actually happening is that our energy field which I was speaking to earlier, and this is what I want to finish explaining with cancer and how fungus shows up and how symptoms appear in our body, is because of our energy field. So when someone crosses your boundaries, you're going to have some kind of an emotional experience. It could be that you become angry, which would be likely. And based on what's happening, you could feel other emotions like shame. And those emotions, if those are suppressed in any kind of a way, and even not necessarily just entirely suppressed, but just because those emotions are impacting your energy field, and because of how our nerve plexuses are connected to our brain, it's going to end up compromising the physical body there. So because our life force, our vital force, our prana, our energy field is what keeps us alive,
right.
and it keeps all the cells alive.
Yeah,
so
totally
if this life energy, which is ideally love, ideally happiness, peace, safety, if it switches into, because of our fight or flight response, if it switches into anger or shame, and if we suppress those feelings, then it's like our energy field stops flowing in a particular part of the body, which is what I was saying earlier. So in this case, somehow your energy field is getting stuck on your right side. And because it gets stuck and it contains negativity, those emotions are anti-life. They don't nourish the cells there, and damage starts to occur because of the energy itself, but also because the energy is stuck. So when energy's not flowing through it, it's like wrapping an elastic. An analogy I've shared lots on other podcasts is, there's nothing wrong with my finger, but if I wrap an elastic around it, now the energy can't flow into my finger anymore, and it's going to launch an inflammatory response. So I'd say what's happening on your face is an inflammatory response, which is always the same in any part of the body. This is how the body responds to damage. And it's because your energy field is being switched into anger or shame, and it's getting stuck there to some degree related to some suppression. Because maybe there's things you'd want to say to your mom, but you don't, right? And there's reasons why people don't do that, because is it even going to help? Probably not. So there's something really spiritual about it, and that's the root of it. It's like, in order to really resolve these things and get our energy flowing again and get our energy back to peace and love, and maybe it can happen through forgiveness, for example. But forgiveness isn't so simple either. There's things to understand there.
Can I share my experience with that real quick?
You can forgive from the mind, you can forgive from the heart. Those are two different things.
One gazillion %, yes. So funny enough, and I've not shared this publicly on this podcast yet. I have put it out on my Telegram channel just because other people had unfortunately brought it up. I've shared this with you, but about a year ago right now, actually, I was having what I would call chronic symptoms in my gut that would not go away, that were right in line with what are common symptoms of colon cancer. And I do not believe these tests whatsoever, but I did take one at the request of some family members, and I took an at-home test. I refused to go get a biopsy or anything like that. I was having symptoms. So like, again, I knew, okay, something's going on. But anyway, I took a test and it was positive. And it, according to my understanding, in order for these tests to be anywhere near accurate, you would have had to take 3 of them within a week's time in order for this specific test, for it to be accurate. And it was colon cancer test. But nonetheless, the first one was positive. I was having chronic symptoms that are in line with what they refer to as colon cancer. So that was enough for me. And I looked it up in German New Medicine, just because that's the framework that I knew to go to at that time. And it checked out quite a bit. It said indigestible anger is colon cancer. That's indigestible anger conflict. And instantly I knew that I had a lot of stuff that had just previously occurred, again, with my mother, where I tried to move into compassion. What's also interesting, though, because correct me if I'm wrong, in your framework, colon cancer is related to financial issues.
It's oftentimes related to
Okay, it
that,
can be.
but it's oftentimes related to a tribal challenge too.
Okay.
So a challenge in the family
Yeah.
or some other like group.
Well, that was all occurring too.
Mhm.
That was. So like financial issues were occurring and tribal challenge was occurring too. So like in your framework, it checks out too. But nonetheless, all that to say,
And by the way, the deep emotion isn't anger, it's shame.
I was also experiencing
Yeah.
that quite a bit too. Wow. Okay. Because there's a lot of enmeshment in my childhood related to my mom, where I was like her surrogate father, surrogate husband, and then she had rejected me because I have a relationship with my dad the last few years. So that sent me into a lot of shame because it was like piece of my identity is now rejecting me, right? Because I had my identity wrapped up in her.
Mhm.
So that triggers shame. And of course, mother wound oftentimes does trigger like shame and guilt. So lots of stuff going on. All that to say, I instantly knew that this anger or whatever I was experiencing in my gut, whether it was anger, shame, combination of both, was related to me trying to intellectualize my forgiveness related to my mom, where I had a lot of anger and frustration and all these emotions that were coming up. And I tried to just switch it over to, oh, just have compassion and forgiveness for your mom. And I did not truly feel compassionate or forgiving at that point yet, but I tried to force myself to, which is why I think this then ultimately did manifest, because I had not actually dealt with the anger and frustration sufficiently related to that specific thing.
Right. And that is suppression.
Yeah.
Right. You're trying to solve the problem at the level of the mind,
Yes.
which is a big focus today, is solving problems with our mind.
Mhm.
It doesn't work especially with cancer. There's value in changing our perceptions of things,
Totally.
but what you just described is a perfect example of what is common for people.
Mhm.
They try to forgive, they try to be okay with something, and then they ignore the emotions that are still there that are not resolved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did.
Mhm.
And it was also interesting, and we've talked about this a little bit before, is that I did 9 combo ceremonies, and combo itself is a very emotional thing as well. At least in my experience it is. And the first combo ceremony I did when I purged, my throw up was like black, like black throw up.
Yeah,
which
dark,
is really interesting. Yeah.
spiritual, like dark,
Yeah, man.
dark energy in there that you're harboring.
Yeah, I instantly
Yeah,
knew
really
that.
interesting.
Yeah.
I think an important thing is to just bring up the fact that cancer is related to suppression,
Mhm.
and Hammer's not focused on that.
Yeah.
And he's focused on a unexpected, shocking experience occurs, and that's what causes the cancer. And this is what he claims to be an iron rule.
Mhm.
And that's actually not necessarily how it works. And
When you say iron rule, or when he says iron rule, does that mean like that this is how it is?
I presume that that's what that means.
What was the translation
Right.
for iron rule?
Iron rule.
Iron rule, literally, of course, German is so
Right.
very...
It's like it's not going to change, and this is it, and that's part of the first biological law as well, which he says is a law.
Mhm.
But the experience you just shared doesn't actually line up with that.
No,
So
doesn't.
because what's really going on, like a deeper understanding of cancer, is that it's related to suppression.
Yeah.
That's the real thing that needs to be understood. Trying to view it as a biological special program, I don't think there's some value in it because it changes a person's mindset. So now they're like trusting the body more.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring
rather
up
than
too.
thinking something's wrong. Because like the medical system would say, there's something wrong with the body, we have to fix it. But Hammer goes to the opposite extreme and says it's a special program that has like deep purposes, and he has theories for all that, and what I'm saying is that it's neither of those.
Mhm.
It's a simple inflammatory response
Mhm.
and your body has to fix the damage that's happened, and that's what it's doing. It's not trying to produce more milk if it's a tumor in the breast. It's not trying to produce more digestive juice if it's a tumor in the colon. Like when you had colon cancer, if you did, which that lines up with what I would teach,
Mhm.
it wasn't because your body was trying to produce more digestive juices.
Mhm.
It was because you were out of alignment with love, if we talk spiritually, and you were holding on to something related to your mother that you couldn't let go of yet. And because you're holding on and suppressing emotions related to it, like anger or deeper shame because of that rejection, that was causing stuck energy in your energy field at your colon because of how the nerve plexuses work with the brain and the body. And because the energy was stuck there, this is the part I haven't explained yet about cancer. Because the energy's stuck there, not moving, it can no longer, like it's no longer flowing.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is the physical cells in that part of the body start to become compromised.
Mm-hmm.
The life force energy has to flow through the cells. It has to be renewed. It's stuck. And it's containing anger or shame or both, or other things like fear. So it's stuck and containing negative anti-life energies. And what that does is it starts to damage the cells there. They become compromised and they literally enter into a death state.
That checks out to me a little bit more.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest, like totally honest. And it could be just because we're sitting here having this conversation, but it does, especially with what I know about water and how we're comprised of fourth phase water and how water itself can be programmed based on our repetitive thought energy focused on it. Like, and it also lines up with traditional Chinese medicine. I don't know for sure specifically with colon
Maybe
cancer.
not that explanation I'm giving, but yeah.
You see what I'm saying? Yeah, that checks out.
And because the cells are entering into a death state and they begin literally dying, then what happens is Mother Nature's cleanup crew comes in and starts to clean up those dead cells. And one of the fungus. That makes sense to me because I was trying to make sense of like, wait, are they dead cells and fungi? Like, how are they of course, fungus and bacteria are Mother Nature's cleanup crew. So they're bioremediating that situation. Yeah, exactly.
So it's not that fungus is like the problem. It's that fungus is doing the job that fungus is supposed to do.
Right. And I talked to Doug Kaufman recently. I was bringing him up earlier. I think I might have forgot to finish that, but he was saying cancer is a fungus. And I'm saying fungus doesn't cause cancer, Doug. And we had this kind of like disagreement, but we got along really well. And recently I've talked to him and now our discoveries and theories have merged.
Yeah.
I just had one conversation with him, but what I'm saying is stress is causing tension in the energy field and emotional suppression related to that stress causes the tension that I just described briefly there.
Yeah.
That compromises the cells. Then fungus starts to grow.
Yeah.
And so now his theory and mine come together and it comes together really beautifully, I think. And like, I mean, cancer's a problem, of course. But I want to say though, with regards to German new medicine, that despite the fact that I disagree with a lot of the theories of German new medicine, I don't think there's a special biological program. And my experiences don't line up exactly with like what causes testicular cancer, colon, lung. There are some similarities. I do just want to say that I respect Dr. Hammer for going deeper into this understanding that there's something going on in people's lives that's causing symptoms in the body, like psycho-emotionally. That's not how he words it, but and I also want to say that I think it's leading people in the right direction. And I think that like the guy that you're sharing that was on your podcast that has nuanced it and he's bringing in some outside understandings and kind of like utilizing more than that and not just seeing it religiously like it is in fact the iron rule when I don't think it is. I think that has value.
Yeah.
You know, I think that has value. So I respect German new medicine, but I know it's not nice for people to hear me say I disagree and I don't like some of it. And some of it's dangerous too. Like I think it's really dangerous to tell people that these symptoms of cancer, the tumor appearing, the pain, this is a sign you're healing, when I really do not think that that's the case. I really want to emphasize that.
So you would say it's more so like, it's really time we start addressing the root cause here.
Yeah. And if
That's
anything,
fair.
you should correlate those symptoms to what's going on in your life. So if you have pain, then ask yourself what's going on right now inside my mind about the challenge and in my relationship or in my job or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And correlate it, because our body's constantly a feedback loop in that way. It's letting us know.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So before we talk about according to like what you've come to understand about cancer, the specificity related to things like breast cancer, lung cancer, I want to get there. Before we get there though, I would be remiss if I didn't go over some of the other, let's say, alternative health related things that are claimed to help resolve cancer. And I say alternative rather than natural because some of these are straight up pharmaceutical products that are just simply being touted by so-called alternative health-leaning people that like really make me want to throw up. But I would be remiss if I didn't bring them up. For example, Mel Gibson was just on Joe Rogan Experience lately talking about fenbendazole. How do you pronounce that? Fenbendazole?
I think that's right.
Yeah, fenbendazole. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. And ivermectin for cancer. And there's a lot of people right now talking about that, both before that Joe Rogan episode, but especially now afterwards. And there's been people over the last 4 years talking about ivermectin resolving cancer. And I have my take on ivermectin. I think it is a toxic pharmaceutical. That's my honest take on it. And there's countless reasons I could go into that. Dr. Andy Kaufman and I just talked about that. So you can find that in an episode just a couple before this. But yeah, what is your opinion on those two as it relates to, quote, resolving cancer, if you have one at all?
Well, what's interesting is that so first of all, I don't think it's going to address the root cause. That's the thing that matters the most. But what's interesting is that both of those, I think, are antifungals or anti-parasite, antifungal.
What's interesting about that, though, is that presents a problem because they're just, if the fungus is purposeful, right, because it is decomposing, decaying tissue, simply what they're doing is killing the fungus that had a role to decompose decaying tissue that was decaying for a reason.
Exactly. And this is coming back to the story I was sharing about black salve. Black salve is probably, I'm assuming, some kind of antifungal. Not just in general, like destroys all fungus, but like all mold or something. There's thousands, I think millions of different kinds of fungus and parasites that exist on the planet. And their job is to find a way to break down the tissue, right? So this is why I think chemotherapy doesn't work long-term. It has a 2 to 3% success rate, by the way.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. There was a study done in 1985 to like carefully assess the long-term success of chemotherapy. And it showed a 2 to 3% success rate out of 400,000 people that were taking chemo. Following long-term, look at, is this successful? 2 to 3% success.
Wow.
That was done in 1985. It was in an article. I forget the name of it, but I can give you the reference if you want it.
Okay.
And then they did another study in 2004 to see if that had changed. It's the exact same results, 2 to 3%.
Despite billions and billions and billions and billions in cancer research.
Yeah, and all that research primarily is done on like how to destroy cancer. But not done on studying people's lives and not done on like what we're discussing, right? So I think the reason is because I think the reason why chemotherapy has value and has caught on and is emphasized and insisted upon by medical personnel is because it destroys cancer. That's a good thing in a certain way, right? But what's interesting is that black salve destroys cancer too. But like I said, it just grows back again. And I wouldn't doubt that ivermectin and fenbendazole also potentially destroy cancer cells because it seems like they're antifungals and antiparasites. And Doug Kaufman has shared with me that there's been really profound examples of people who had cancer who were accidentally given antifungal medications instead of the chemotherapy, and that destroyed their cancer.
Interesting.
So a lot of antifungal medications have been repurposed into chemotherapy drugs. But see, here's the problem, and this is an analogy I learned from Doug Kaufman. When something's dying, and like I said earlier, when our energy field gets stuck because we're in emotional suppression, a part of our body begins to die. And by the way, this is why so many people can be healthy. Like I exercise, I eat well, I eat organic. I don't even eat refined sugar. This is a thing I discovered from my own theory in the past. I'm not even eating refined sugar. Like, whoa, but you still have cancer. It doesn't make sense. It's because it's something deeper that you can't see on the surface. It's the emotional suppression, right? So what happens is if that tissue's dying, then fungus has to grow there. It's going to appear there. It's almost impossible to stop it from happening. If you think about in nature, and this is the story from Doug Kaufman, if you pick a piece of fruit from a tree or falls from the tree, it was connected to its life force, its source of life, right? So our energy field is our source of life. It comes from the soul, by the way, and it feeds all of our cells, and it's flowing through the cells. If you pick a piece of fruit, it's no longer connected to its source of life. Now it's actually in a death state. So if you eat it soon afterwards, it still has lots of life force in it. But as time goes on, it's going to decompose, and it decomposes by through fungus. And maybe you could argue bacteria and
it's part of the pleomorphic cycle.
Fungus is a really major breakdown organism on the planet. And so what you'll find is that you'll see this part of the apple starts to become bad, and it starts to grow mold, a form of fungus. And what the medical system does, and what ivermectin, fenbendazole, black salve, apricot kernels, all these things are trying to do is trying to destroy this fungus. And it's like, oh, it works. We discovered something destroys the fungus. So it's like, but it grows back because the root of it is that it's supposed to be there, according to nature's laws. So if you cut out the fungus from an apple, if you have an apple that's going bad and you notice where it is, you cut that out, the rest of the apple is great. You could eat that apple. But one day later, there's another bad spot in the apple. You can cut that out, or let's say poison it and destroy the bacteria or the fungus somehow. Then another day later, it's bad again. And eventually the whole thing decomposes. That's literally what's happening to people because they're trying to destroy the cancer. Because what they're really trying to destroy is fungus, and you can't just you can destroy fungus, but it's so powerful and it's so good at surviving and mutating,
pleomorphism. That's literally what I was addressing earlier.
Right. So
it'll just change roles.
It'll change.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's oftentimes experienced with people with cancer. Their cancer, the one chemotherapy was working, but now suddenly it's not working. So then they try a new one. Okay, that one's working, but now it stops working. So ivermectin, fenbendazole, I'm not saying it wouldn't have value because maybe it could shrink, but of course it's going to have a whole list of side effects because, like you said, it's a toxin. All pharmaceutical drugs are poisons, by the way. It's a full-on poison, right? That interferes with the part of the body in some kind of a way to try to reduce symptoms. But it's doing that by interfering. That's why every single pharmaceutical that exists, as far as I know, has a list of side effects because they are poisons. So,
and it's still based in a war paradigm too.
So we're taught from the youngest age that if a symptom appears in our body, something's wrong with our body. And we got to go and try to get it fixed. It's a really big problem. Our body's protecting us. We got to get this. And the other thing is we have to take responsibility. We have to be taught responsibility. If a symptom appears in our body, don't guilt trip yourself. If you have cancer, don't guilt trip yourself. Love yourself. Realize, shit, something's not right for me in my life. And maybe I'm contributing to it because of how I was raised. So cancer brings us into deep, deep stuff. We got, to really understand cancer, and especially to prevent it, we have to understand what it really is, what the cause is. And then the real work of prevention is to start getting into our belief systems, our subconscious that's formed from the past, how to process our emotions, how to grow spiritually through the challenges of life, and we need the tools for that. We have to grow our independence and be able to truly resolve relationship challenges. And by the way, I gotta mention the turbo cancer thing.
Let's hear it.
At this point, maybe it's even making sense why turbo cancers would have appeared so much.
Can I guess?
Sure.
Because people are having to reconcile their worldview was totally wrong, totally flipped upside down, and also that they made a decision that was totally disharmonious with their health.
That's one great example right there. Yeah, sure. That would cause a lot of emotional confliction inside and potentially ending up carrying emotions of regret or fear or anger, resentment, whatever it might be, and not being able to come to resolution, just feeling stuck. Just feeling stuck. Yeah. And
Would you add anything to that?
Yes.
Okay, let's hear.
The other ones were one of the common challenges in relationship dynamics. the human race has a problem with connection and love and understanding, permission to be ourselves, permission to make our choices. A lot of guilt tripping was happening with people, ultimatums, shaming, threats, anger, control. There was a lot of emotional pain in relationships that ended up causing suppression. Like friendships were lost, relationships were damaged, families were broken apart, all kinds of stressful challenges related to that big fear that everyone had. And that turned into control and all these other things. So there's just emotional turmoil, so that I think is what really caused a spike in the incidence of cancer at the time, if that's really true, and it seems to be true.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
It does make a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I mean, I had lots of people doing sessions with me, and when I asked them what's going on in your life, then that is coming up,
Yeah.
Like I can no longer see my grandkids. How do you deal with that? Suppression. It's pretty difficult. How do you deal with it, right? So, yeah, I think like a real the deeper understanding of cancer is crucial for humanity to actually go down a path of real evolution.
Yeah,
where the world becomes a better place. Like if we're focusing on juicing, not to say that juicing doesn't have some value, but if we're focusing on juicing to try to solve a problem that's truly spiritual and emotional, that's related to love, we're wasting time. And like the incidence of cancer is growing from what I can see. And it's because we're not really addressing it. The real deeper thing about cancer is it's related to love and real spirituality. And what I think real spirituality is to look at ourselves, the willingness to look at ourselves with loving intention to find out what we need to change, what we need to learn, what we need to do differently so that we have harmony in our life. But what we're taught from a young age, by example too, from authorities, caregivers, is to not do that. Instead, blame other people, shame other people, punish other people, hold resentment, hold anger, and we don't have the tools to do anything differently. So that has become my primary focus.
Yeah.
Like when I work with people with cancer, I focus on the basics of physical health. It's not that complicated.
Well, I have an idea for how that relates, circling back.
Okay. Yeah.
So as society has become more disconnected from the natural world, which I consider, and I know you do too, because we talked about this yesterday, creation or manifestation of God. Like that's what the natural world is. I mean, all these things that we're sitting in an unnatural environment right now, but these are all also creations ultimately, or extensions of us who are extensions of God. We are not gods, let's be clear there, but we are extensions of the one true God that created this realm. And I look at God's creations as having innate harmony about them. Human creations, it depends. It depends on how much intention is put into that specific creation. So we'd have to take each human creation and analyze it for what intention went into it.
I like what you're saying, yeah.
Right? So I think that when we start adopting these more natural approaches to health, thus getting adequate nutrition, and I don't look at nutrition the same way that I used to. I look at it more of like the energetic imprint of that thing. Like, is it closer to God's true creation? Right?
I love it. Yeah.
Or we're looking at toxins. Are we exposed to too many things that are imbued with harmful intentions and harmful use, or let's say devoid of true impressed upon God intention that man has created, right? And that would be overaccumulation of toxins, like glyphosate, for example. Its intention is literally anti-life. So of course that's going to be harmful to us. My point that I'm getting at is, when we're engaging less with the natural world and God, it makes it harder for our life force energy and who and what we truly are to deal with the emotional conflicts that we typically maybe in past societies when cancer was not as frequently occurring, when people were connected to the natural world more, it made it much easier for them to deal with those emotional things because they had a clean vessel to deal with those emotional things. And they had community. They were living amongst community that when something would happen, I would imagine, I mean, I'm sure in the worst cases, they would just kill that dude, whoever did something wrong. But in most cases, I would imagine that they had a loving way to address certain things that were going on in said community. And I think that that's how toxins and malnutrition also do ultimately play into this. It's still not the cause, but they can benefit you in resolving the cause, because the more you're connected to God and God's creation, living a more natural lifestyle, the more easy it is for you to deal with those emotions and those stressors as they come. I mean, because my next question was going to be your thoughts on water fasting, and it was rhetorical in my mind, but it was going to be for the people who are listening and watching. Because I know with water fasting, as we talked about earlier, the thing that occurred that was most prevalent during my water fast was having to deal with those suppressed emotions. That's why. Like, because I've interviewed Lauren Lockman, I think it was episode 14. He runs Tanglewood Wellness Center in Costa Rica, where he's dealt with upwards of 2,000 people and resolved a number of things, MS, multiple autoimmune conditions, chronic morbid obesity, stage 3, 4 cancer. This is according to him. And again, after my own direct experience, and I've heard this from countless people who've done water fast, things that are most challenging but most potent in the healing process is dealing with the emotional things during a water fast. So yeah, that's what I think is going on when it comes to the interplay of these other components. I think that you're getting closer to God. I guess that one more thing I wanted to mention, I interviewed this guy, Dean Hall, who had, I think, lymphoma twice and has reversed it naturally twice. But the one thing that I asked him in that episode, because he says it's through cold immersion therapy and forest bathing, and I'm not going to discount his experience or his claims, but I did ask him this, and I made a point to him. I was like, how much of it do you think is emotional? He said, I think it's like a fundamental component of it. Now, I don't know with certainty that he's fully on board with you. I would imagine that he likely is. But the point is, I
actually interviewed him as well, and he, well, I don't know if I should say he's fully on board, but he appeared to be really resonating with what I'm teaching too. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it makes sense with what I'm saying about he's connecting with the natural world more, where you're also less distracted too. But because he's connecting with God more through forest bathing, it makes it easier to process. I mean, I won't say easier. It's hard. It can be very challenging, but a natural byproduct of that, when you're doing it continually, is that those things do start coming to the surface, and it does become more front of your mind. You have to address them. And that is, in my opinion, getting to the root. So I think that's how all those things play in.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I like that you're calling it God's creation. That's what I say too. And I haven't met someone that uses that language. It's cool to hear you say that. But that's how I started to see it. Over the years, my beliefs about God and like how I perceive it has really changed a lot for lots of reasons. Like our perception of God, and when people have cancer, they sometimes are really trying to have this relationship with God through prayer to try to heal, and sometimes that doesn't even work because of, I think, their perception of God. And one of the valuable parts of the perception, I think that's really important, is to see God's creation, to be able to see God's creation and then get into it like you're describing. So like this microphone is not God's creation, that's mankind's creation. And like you said, there can be like good creations by man and bad ones. But God's creation would be, let's say, with the example of Dean Hall, the river and the forest. Man, rivers are so beautiful, and it's like they're a gift. I see it like it's a magical gift from God. It's just so nourishing. And yes, I've done lots of river bathing myself. And if you get into a river and you let the energy of the water like move through you, and then you get out of the river, you can have your energetic state and your emotional state can be changed to positive just like that.
Yes.
Like the healing waters of God. Like, whoa. Of course, mankind can pollute the river, So like, it's one way to look at, like, we need to have a healthy relationship with God and actually respect God's creation because it's a gift. And like, we can just dirty it.
Yeah.
We can clear cut forests, for example. It's disrespect to God in a deep way.
Yeah.
Like, let's have a loving relationship with God, an appreciative one. But anyways, yeah, if you go out into if you have a whole bunch of emotional charges and challenges in life and you're busy scrolling social media, you're probably not going to resolve that.
Right.
But if you go out and now you could work with a therapist or someone like myself who trains like root cause practitioner is what I call it. Someone that understands the root cause work, then they can help you release it. But you can also go into nature and be with your soul. So God isn't just we can connect to God not just in God's creation, like the forest and the river, but I believe our primary connection to God is also inside our soul. Yeah. And you have to connect to your soul in order to receive the benefits of its guidance. And when you're in nature, so if you're inside God's creation, then it increases the chance that you can also connect to God more directly through your own soul too. And the answers are oftentimes there.
Yeah. In nearly all cases with modern health systems, you're waiting months for appointments only to spend a mere 10 minutes with a doctor who quickly hands out a generic diagnosis that is likely rooted in a total misunderstanding of health and causes, and then you're offered a one-size-fits-all medication or invasive treatments with unpleasant side effects. If this sounds all too familiar, consider a different approach with the New Biology Clinic, founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, a respected natural health doctor, author, and speaker. Dr. Cowan's holistic perspective on health and wellness and a deep understanding of the true nature of health and disease sets this clinic apart. With the New Biology Clinic, it's not about quick fixes and suppressing symptoms. The practitioners take time to understand your unique story, recognizing that health is unique to the individual and that illnesses have a variety of causes, physically and metaphysically. Members of the New Biology Clinic enjoy a flat monthly fee that includes a range of valuable services like health consults as needed, practitioner-led live streams on diverse health topics, access to a members-only resource library, and multiple live group sessions every month. These sessions cover fitness, breathing integration, biofield tuning, guided meditation, EFT tapping, and much more. Unlike traditional healthcare systems that thrive on frequent visits, prescriptions, treatments, and suppressing symptoms, the New Biology Clinic's motivation is to make you healthy and keep you that way. Visit newbiologyclinic.com to learn more and use code THEWAYFORWARD for $50 off your account activation. If you're a member of The Way Forward, email hello@thewayforward.com to receive $150 off your account activation. Your journey to genuine healing begins here. Hey y'all, I'm here with Melissa Kupsch from Remedy Academy of Homeopathy. We are so stoked here at The Way Forward to be partnering with Melissa and Remedy in order to spread the message of homeopathy across the world and also to partner on the eventual development of healing centers across the United States.
People are pretty quickly coming to realize that frequency is the future of medicine. We are witnessing the great resurgence of homeopathy right now. We're really moving away from that suppressive medical model. Whether it's for eczema, asthma, hormones, fertility, anxiety, depression, trauma, whatever it is, it all starts as energy in the person's field first. If we change our field, we can completely change our life. Our 2-year academy is open worldwide to anyone who wants to become a homeopath. We've got 5 lecturers and we currently have over 500 students enrolled, which is record numbers in our field. A career in homeopathy is amazing for anyone who wants flexibility in their work and who wants to be valuable in creating this new world. We have stay-at-home parents enrolled, we have ex-medical professionals, grandparents signed up who want to learn how to heal their grandchildren and pass on that invaluable knowledge. We even have husband and wife teams. So my husband enrolled in the course with no prior knowledge of health as a background, and he is loving it.
Kylie is also enrolled as well, so my partner is, and she's so stoked to become a homeopath and to be helping to spread this message across the world.
The thing that we hear from so many of our students is, I found my thing. Homeopathy is the key. We harness frequencies from nature and we alter the field of all creations. So if anybody wants to join us or they want to know more about it, they can visit our website.
Yeah, and all that information will be in the show notes. So if you want to learn more about Remedy Academy, also RMDY Collective, also some of the homeopathic products that they have, please just head to the show notes. All of that will be listed there. So before we get into resolving, I think that's like, it would be bad if we did not talk about resolving a little bit. We just left it at, all right, so that's what it is. Good luck. Well, talk about resolving. And I know you talk about that quite a bit in what you're doing with Root Cause Institute, and all the links for that are in the show notes. So people want to learn more from Paul, and I'm assuming learn more from Arya too. Do you do some of the teaching? For sure. Okay, great. I'm bummed. We're going to figure out a way next time when we do a part 2 for you're going to be sitting right there as well. So we'll be able to interview both of you.
Yeah. Because Arya is the other half of this, of Root Cause Institute. She's teaching, and she's wise in her own ways, wiser than me in many ways. And awesome. She's a really important element to it. Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome to hear. Yeah, and she's just been sitting over here off camera giving us feedback on things. So it's been good. But so before we get into talking about resolution and how to really, you already brought up like belief systems and the subconscious mind, and really learning true forgiveness and compassion and love for oneself and others, et cetera, et cetera. Before we get there, I want to go over, according to the framework that you've sort of developed through doing this over the last 16 years, regarding this specificity, the specific emotion related to some cancers. So what I did is I basically just took the top 8 most frequently occurring cancers in the United States, and I'd like just to hear what you've come to understand as the cause or causes emotionally of those cancers. So the first we'll start with is breast cancer. Okay. The common emotion with breast cancer, it depends on whether it's on the left-hand side or the right-hand side, but the common emotions with breast cancer by far are guilt or rage. Those are the two main ones. Yeah. Got it. And then lung cancer. Lung cancer is grief, but oftentimes there's an element of guilt with it. Guilt. So maybe like, because it's loss/grief, because you said loss earlier too, right? Loss/grief and guilt. So maybe it's like, I wasn't involved enough with that, or... Exactly. Got it. Yep. Got it. That makes sense. Okay. Prostate cancer. Prostate cancer, the primary emotion is shame. Shame. Okay. Okay. I guess emotions and theme. So Arya asked off camera, do you want to know about the emotions or also the theme? So let's say theme and emotion for each of these. Okay, so... Going back to breast cancer then. Theme 2. Breast cancer, the theme is related to personal sacrifice, related to love. Because it's in the cardiac plexus too. That's like a scientific association of how the brain and the nervous system works. But can you give me an example for breast cancer? Maybe that'd be helpful too. Examples for each of them. Yeah, sure. A common cause of breast cancer is when a woman finds herself in a situation where she is giving way too much of herself to the point where she's losing herself, but because of guilt, for example, can't stop or feels like she can't stop. So she keeps giving to a point where the sacrifice reaches a high enough level that it turns into emotional suppression and causes a lump. Got it. Okay. And then for lung cancer, I think we already sufficiently answered that. Yeah, but maybe a common one is that someone dies. Then we have a lot of grieving pain, oftentimes layered with guilt, and don't really truly resolve it, but use some other way to try to like move on. And then we carry that, and then that turns into a tumor. And with lung cancer, it's just to add something here. What I realized with lung cancer too is that oftentimes it's one of the cancers that appears much later after it initially started growing. And the reason is because the lungs are this big open space. There's a lot of room in there generally for a tumor to be there. So a person can have a tumor in their lung for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and not even know, potentially. Whereas if a person has a tumor growing, let's say in the pancreas, which would be an example of like an opposite extreme where there's very little room or space, then that tumor starts to create issues and problems really fast. And pancreatic cancer is like one of the cancers that can lead to death if it's not resolved like really quickly.
You know what's
whereas
interesting
lung
about
cancer
that?
doesn't.
You know what's interesting? Sorry to interrupt.
Mhm.
You know what's interesting about that though is like, if we're looking at this from the perspective of like us being perfectly designed by God, and loss is a common part of life. Grief is a common part of life. Like it happens to people. And it can be, I'd imagine, one of the more challenging things to deal with in life. That given what you just said about our lungs, there's a lot more room in there, and a tumor can be going 1 to 2 to 3 years unnoticed. I wonder if that's like an intentional aspect of our biology, so that because that is one of the more challenging ones, I would imagine, to resolve, that it's like more space for you and more time for you to approach and resolve this specific thing. Have you thought about that before?
That's interesting. No, I've not thought about that. That's an interesting thought. Yeah.
Yeah, I could be totally wrong, but that's just what like popped in my
Yeah,
mind.
there's a spiritual reason to give you more
Yeah,
time
that's what
to
I'm
deal
saying.
with it, because it's something that happens to us all.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
That's really interesting. It's like there's more leeway there, more more room for error kind of a thing. Yeah, that's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. Think on that more.
Okay.
Are you too? Okay, so with prostate cancer, theme and emotion, an example.
The theme there is related to manhood. It's like it's a feeling of shame about. So there's different scenarios, but oftentimes it's, feeling like, one example would be like feeling like a failure as a man. So I didn't show up good enough as a father, and now the opportunity's gone, and then not being able to reconcile that.
I could totally see that one. Especially in Western society. Wow. Yeah. That checks out to me. Colon cancer, we covered it a little bit, but theme, example, emotion for that as well.
The primary emotion of colon cancer is shame. Anger can be there, but it's higher up. Like that's easier to connect to. But what's really deeper is shame. And that's commonly related to a theme of survival and security. So that's why money's oftentimes associated with colon cancer. Like I'm not making enough money, or the element of failure can come in here too.
Yeah.
Like I haven't succeeded. And then there's an element of tribe in there. So the shame, for example, can be related to the perception of the tribe. So I feel shame because amongst my family, I'm the failure.
Wow.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
The other people are making money, if we're talking money, but I failed.
So I'm going back to my example. Let's assume for sure that I did have it, right? It could be that because my identity was so enmeshed with my own mother's identity, and I've said this before on the show, I hope I have, because this is a common part of my childhood. I didn't feel safe unless my mom felt all okay when I was little, and I was her surrogate father, surrogate husband. So especially when my dad was at rehab, I was the one holding my mom at night, making sure she was okay. And if I could get her to feel okay, then I could feel safe and okay. So then when she has, over the last few years, rejected me, the reason being I have a relationship with my dad because I've forgiven him, because he's made amends, because he's changed and he's working on himself, and I've forgiven, right? And my mom, for whatever reason, I could, speculate, but only she knows, has rejected me because I have a relationship with my dad. She doesn't speak to me, and that's why. And that's what has led to tremendous amount, totally acknowledge that, shame associated with what is typically a mother wound, but especially because my identity was wrapped up in, like, almost inextricably linked to my mother. And so now that is rejecting me, I feel tremendous amount of shame and unworthiness related to that relationship with my mom that I've had to work to resolve quite a bit.
Yeah.
Does that check out according to?
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And so the shame is like your sense of self-worth is dependent on the tribe.
Yeah.
Your connection to the tribe. And it's so that the issue is tribal because your mom has an issue with your dad, and then that makes it so that you have an issue with her, and then now she's rejecting you because of like this family issue that's going on. And your self-worth was built in a unhealthy way because your mom was too enmeshed with you, too connected with or attached to you, and so then that created an attachment from you to her. Just like you said, like as a child, as children, we are 100% dependent on our parents for all of our needs to be met, our emotional needs. We have to feel safe, we have to feel loved, we have to feel like we matter, etc. And so this is where the root cause of cancer, where it needs to go, which is where I've gone with it. Like I call it the root cause work. We have to get really deep into what went on in our childhood. Yeah, because in order to resolve that issue completely, you probably need to understand some of the things you're already sharing, like what went on in your childhood and why, and ultimately break the attachment with your mother. And then rebuild your self-worth so it's not dependent on her. And this is why I teach the tools that I teach in our level 1 training, the 15-step process. The reason your mom probably attached to you is because she didn't have the tools. She didn't know how to deal with her emotional pain and her stress. So instead of bringing resolution inside herself, which she would do if she knew how, but not knowing how, and sure, sometimes people refuse. Sometimes people go into denial. They don't want to take responsibility. That does happen too. But mostly I think it's because people just don't have the tools. And so then because she's not resolved, she now reaches outside of herself to you, her son, to try to have her emotional needs met. Then you have this enmeshment formed, and now your self-worth starts to build because you're saving your mom.
Yes, literally.
Yeah.
Now this description.
You saved your mom, and now she rejects you. That causes anger.
100%. But below that, it totally resonates. Like anger, I could totally see on the surface, but it's even deeper than that. It's shame at feeling rejected by what I subconsciously, almost in a weird way, considered a part of myself. I mean, quite literally in a way, because that's my mom, but like I'm talking about in the world now, like a part of myself, because my identity was so wrapped up in her. Yeah. It checks out. It really does. Okay. Skin cancer.
Skin cancer is usually related to a boundary issue, and it's usually related to the tribe again. And skin cancer, the primary emotion is oftentimes worry and rage. Or rage.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that yours, do not take this the wrong way, but it's not as hyper-specific as German New Medicine. Like it is more generalized, and it's like it can be a combination of a few different things. Like I appreciate that because it allows for wiggle room. You get what I'm saying there?
Yeah, well, every situation's so unique, right? Like someone else can have colon cancer, and it's definitely going to be related to shame, and it's definitely going to be related to survival and the tribe. But yeah, we need to leave room for the specific, unique details there. Yeah.
Okay, for bladder cancer.
Bladder cancer is related to fear itself in a large way, and the suppression of fear too. And fear, when it escalates, it reaches like a higher level of fear is terror. So oftentimes there's terror. And what I've found so far in every single client that I've experienced with bladder cancer or kidney cancer, they have been bullied tremendously in their childhood. And oftentimes they're bullied by their parents. That's where it really originates. So fear is the primary emotion there.
Do people who have frequently occurring UTIs, would that be like also indication that they might have been bullied a lot when they were younger? Would you say?
Can you explain more about a UTI?
So like urinary tract infection? I know it's not directly related to the bladder, but it's like downstream of the bladder, if you will.
I haven't worked with a client with a urinary tract infection, so nothing comes to me immediately, like from my experience. But if I were to theorize about it, that it would be. It would make it sounds really plausible to me.
Cool.
Because both bladder and kidney are oftentimes related to bullying. So the urinary tract's connected there. So
yeah, it's interesting because someone that I know who was bullied quite a bit when they were younger, they get frequent urinary tract infections. So that's why I brought that up.
It makes sense to me for sure. Yeah, but I can't say I have experience there.
Got it. I appreciate that. I appreciate that you're like, I don't know. Appreciate that as well.
Well, I'm trying to just figure out the truth of things.
Yeah,
to the best of my ability.
Love that. Awesome. Okay, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
That's also related to tribe, and the primary emotion is rage and shame. And usually, what causes a lump with lymphoma is rage, and the lump forms within maximum like a month after the rage. But that's just when they usually notice it. But I think the lump starts growing immediately.
Got it.
Yeah, when the rage is suppressed.
Leukemia.
Leukemia is also tribal. So you're connecting, we might have covered them all now though. But yeah, that's also tribal. And that's related more so to stability. And so the issue there is where a person having a hard time basically letting go of the attachment to the tribe because the tribe makes them feel safe and stable. And if sometimes the tribe is not safe and stable, but this is the issue, like safety and stability. And what the person really needs is to be able to let go and become safe and stable in this world alone, like independent.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. That's the only 8 that I brought up, and I'm sure you have a lot more that you discuss.
Yeah, and I would like in my courses I go into much greater detail, like because there's nuances with each of them, but those are some pretty accurate answers I just gave, though.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so now comes the big shift in the discussion. So now we have, according to the framework that you've developed. Do you have a name for it, by the way? Do you have like a?
I just call it the root cause work.
Okay, root cause work.
Like I have courses for general knowledge on cancer, which I think is essential. I would really like this understanding to reach children, to reach parents and children. So parents know how to navigate the challenges of life with these tools, and then they can also teach their kids.
Yeah. I think that's amazing. Yeah. I mean, like even outside the realm of cancer, I've said this a number of times on the show that I think personally, I've interviewed people that have differences of opinion. That's fine. But I personally think that the overwhelming majority of disease, even outside of cancer, has an emotional component to it.
The first time I discovered the emotional correlation in my own embodiment and experience was years ago. After I had written my book, I had a challenging relationship experience with my wife at that time. We had been together for 12 years. And back then I had no idea that emotions had any kind of an impact really on our body. And there's lots of people today that would just refuse to accept that that's possible too. But we were really successful in our relationship before we hit this challenge. And by success, I mean, we're both healthy, like really fit, and we were happy. And then our business was growing. I had a construction business back then too, and we were doing really well. And my wife, in particular, she had no pain on her menstrual cycle, 0. And I mean for years. And when we first met, she had so much pain that she would have migraines and be bedridden for like 2 days. Every month it was to be expected, like this horrifying, like traumatizing experience. But as we got healthier and happier and successful together, all of her, and we worked through issues and challenges together, all of her menstrual cycle symptoms disappeared. It took years, but eventually we got sort of like clear, and her menstrual cycle was clear. But then when we hit challenges at the 12-year mark, and I didn't even correlate those menstrual cycle symptoms to this. Like, I understand this now today. I thought it was more like related to our diet. We were improving our lifestyle. But when we hit challenges, suddenly her next menstrual cycle was excruciating, like crying in pain. And both of us looked at each other and were like, this has got to be related to the challenges that we've been having together. You know, and that's actually ultimately why we ended up separating.
Wow.
Because I didn't have any tools back then maybe that's one of the reasons when I reflect on why I became passionate about figuring out tools and understanding how to navigate these things, because we didn't succeed,
Yeah.
But that was ultimately why we separated, because both of us understood that her health was not going to improve unless we resolved the matter, which we couldn't. So we separated, which was really painful to separate, but she healed. She was actually diagnosed with endometriosis back then.
Wow.
Yeah. And when we separated, it all cleared up.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I have experienced in my own life too, where like coming to this understanding, and maybe it's that I fundamentally believe this to be true, so it does show up this way in my life. Other people claim that they can, trace back like, oh, I ate this and therefore that's why I got sick, or other people who fallaciously claim like, oh, that person had this so-called viral infection and I was around them, so I got sick, which I obviously, I don't buy into. And I've talked about that. If you're just hearing this, go to episode 141. You can hear all about that. But for me, I can every single instance, every single one, trace back my symptoms to an emotional event every single time. Every single time now. Which requires like radical ownership, as you've said at the beginning, because that means no one's going to fix this shit except for you.
Yeah.
Like other people can give you tools. Obviously, like, we're talking with you, you have tools that you teach, but the only one that can do the work to dissolve those condition limiting beliefs or resolve and actually feel those feelings that you need to feel is you. That's it. You're the only one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can be incredibly empowering, but also incredibly confronting.
Yeah. Well, society, I think, generally doesn't really guide people into reaching that personal responsibility achievement, that level of independence. It's much more like willing to have people feel like victims all the time.
100%.
And not to say that we are not victims of shit that happens to us, but we've got to rise above it.
Difference between being victimized and having and being a perpetual victim. Like, yes, at times I was victimized, but I am not now a victim. Not a victim.
And to add to what you're saying, how spiritually speaking, I view things through the lens of law of attraction. So even if someone does something to me that's not nice, I feel like I've attracted it for some reason that I need to grow. I need to, for example, maybe I'm too attached to people liking me, and I got to get comfortable with the fact that some people might just be mean.
Yeah.
Or maybe I am being inappropriate in some way, and now I've upset someone, so I need to consider why they're upset, But I always reflect, and I never just feel like something's just happening to me.
Yeah.
And that's worked really well. That's really helped me get myself unstuck from challenging scenarios in life.
Yeah.
But that's a key thing with cancer. A key thing. I share what I teach with cancer is that without realizing it, somehow you've created it. And I don't mean it in a guilt trip way. I mean, like, your trauma in childhood, your belief systems, the lack of tools, the challenges of life that can arise, it's all understandable. But how you've been dealing with it, how you've been navigating it has led to this suppression, and you've created the cancer without realizing it. And if you can accept that, then you can step into your power. If you don't accept that and think it's happened to you, then what happens is people focus on the outside and then can not succeed in healing. But like, you've got to turn inwards, forgive yourself, love yourself, and start growing your soul, evolving your soul, learning lessons, making changes, building new strengths. Like, you got to really go through a transformation of self to heal, so you can discard or shed like the parts of your ego that really weren't serving you, and they're such a problem that it's really caused a lot of, like, it's a life or death scenario. This reminds me of a study that Arya found that I really want to share for the scientific-minded people, because I realized that, I have a lot of personal experience, but some people want to hear some science. And unfortunately, like we were discussing earlier, trillions of dollars go into testing new chemotherapy drugs and whether or not that destroys cancer. But almost like comparatively, almost no focus or money goes into studying people and what the emotional and spiritual causes could be. But there was one study that we found that's we find quite impactful, like pretty valuable. Just one. It's like we really searched long and hard. Maybe there's others, but there was a study done in 1988, and the research was about investigating if there's a correlation between the development of cancer in children that have been adopted and grew up in a different family compared to the biological parents. And what this study found, it's like very revealing. It's interesting how it's not reached mainstream, because this is, I think, huge. Like what they found is that when biological parents gave their child away, put them up for adoption, I say it differently. If those parents that gave the children away, if they go forward in life and develop cancer, there's no correlation between how often cancer occurs there and the children that they gave birth to. So this is genetics, right? No correlation. Right. So they could have died of cancer, but the child they gave away, raised by somebody else, no increased chance of them developing cancer.
Wow.
And then what they did is they looked at, okay, is there a correlation between the parents that adopted the child? So the parents that adopted this child, if they develop cancer before the age of 50 is how this study went, is there a correlation? Does that increase the chance that their child will also develop cancer? So this is not genetic.
Right.
And there is a 500% increased chance that the child would go on to develop cancer too.
Wow. Wow.
Because based on my experience, I would say what's really going on is the way that we're navigating life, our belief systems, our the way we process our emotions, the way we deal with, the way we communicate, the way we deal with challenges, that's what we're passing on to our kids. So if you can't succeed in a relationship, if there's constant fighting, how are you going to teach your kids how to succeed in that way and not get into constant fights too? As one example, like there's a myriad of ways we can run into challenges in life, right? But yeah, that study is profound.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how it's like there's thousands of studies every year on chemotherapy, but one that we could find on the emotional causational factor or correlation for cancer from 1988 until now.
That's insane, man. I mean, it makes so much sense, though. It totally makes sense. You know what? Some people who already have this preconceived idea that disease is spread, you know what I mean? Like disease is spread via particles or bacteria, might look at that and be like, this must mean that cancer is passed via some sort of cancer virus or something like that.
That was actually believed to be true way back in the beginning.
Insane.
There was, I think it was like a hospital in France or something, like many years ago, was moved because it was a cancer hospital and they believed that it was contagious.
Oh my God.
So they moved the whole hospital way outside the city. There's something I want to add to what I just said. That was one important study I just shared, but there are some other there is some other research that lends to this connection, this correlation. One which might be well known by some people is the ACE study. Yeah. So,
dude,
when I said there's one study, my statement was a little bit too absolute. There's some evidence of others too, like the ACE study is a really important one too.
Yeah, but my ACE score is pretty high.
Okay, right. So is mine. That's one of the reasons why I've had to figure out a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm constantly working on healing myself too, and I'm not done.
Amen.
I mean,
Amen,
yeah, there's always more to learn. Like,
yeah. What you're getting at there, though, is that like this one is specifically related to cancer and indicative of the emotional components, but there's countless other examples that are secondary and tertiary, but that lead back to, if you have this foundational understanding, like, this makes sense.
Yeah.
And I know that when it comes to other studies that are leading to the emotional, or leading one to understand the emotional aspects of cancer. You guys have several other ones you go into at Root Cause Institute, but you would say that that's probably the one that is the most like, wow, this is.
Yeah, especially because of the adopted parents part.
Yeah.
Because it reveals like both the genetic
theory
flaw, and then also how what's being passed on in families is like something deeper is being passed on, you know? Yeah.
Okay, now's the big question. So how do we begin to address the root cause?
A lot of these questions were big already, weren't they?
Oh yeah, I know. Yeah, they were. But this is like the big ending, the big so what? Like, okay, how do I begin to address this?
Well, I built a whole course on this, so it's not like easy to share. And
this could be like a 5-part series if we went into this part, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what we have to accomplish in order to heal, a person has to reconnect to their soul. They have to realize that they have lost a certain amount of connection to their soul, and they are in some degree of suppression. So we have to come out of suppression. The one powerful way to do that, and often necessary, absolutely necessary way to do that as a first step, is to become more alone. And that's often the opposite of what people do. So when people develop cancer, oftentimes they want to be surrounded by people. And I understand that, like, logically. And also people would want to be there and love them and support them.
Yeah.
And there's oftentimes a big desire for that. But but to heal, we have to do the opposite. We have to separate more and go into our aloneness, like, for example, go out into nature so we can connect to our soul and our emotions and begin accessing the parts of ourself that we've lost connection to.
You could say eliminate the other voices for some time.
Yeah. And it really is about growing. It really needs to be understood, not just as a philosophy, but really there is a process in the human journey that is about the evolution of our soul. So we've gotten stuck in life. We've disconnected from our heart in some kind of a way, and we need to grow. We need to grow through this. So that's a huge thing. Just having that perception can be really helpful. And what I say, for example, is cancer is not a gift, but you can turn it into a gift. And if you turn it into a gift, like this is happening for a purposeful reason, that can help too, to bring the motivation. Another really important part of healing is to really get clear on why you want to heal. And a really important part of that is it needs to be for you. Many people say, I want to heal because of my kids or for my partner or for whatever. But it needs to be for something that's just about you. And the reason why that's so important is because that is about self-love. So self-love, we need love. We need to love ourselves to heal. Like I shared, in many cases of cancer, there's a significant experience of personal sacrifice happening where we're loving others, but not ourselves. And I think that if we can really, truly learn how to love ourselves, that's the process. That's a big part of the process, is learning how to love ourselves. I realized, for example, when I forget what age I was, but at some point when I was waking up more to my own like needed growth, which, as I said, is it's an ongoing endeavor. One part though is I realized, man, I don't know how to actually rest. I really did not even know how to rest. I could not give myself permission to rest. I was just like a machine, a workaholic. And when I tried to rest, I didn't know how. It just felt meaningless. So I just get right back to work. So I was missing a component of how to love myself in that way. And then I also just tied that to play. I didn't even know how to play. In most societies, we're taught that play is competition. Play and competition I'd like to separate these two things. Play, for example, would be, maybe I'll dance to a song that doesn't even have words, and I will explore my body, and I'll jump up and down. I might even get myself laughing, enjoying this music, exploring my body. That's like a form of play. But trying to beat the person at like chess is not like, it's a form of play.
Yeah.
You know, but it's competition based, and there's a power element there. There's a winner, there's a loser. Of course, you can be light about it, but you can also get really pissed off if you lose.
Well, I could also see even in like individual endeavors, for example, snowboarding, right? Like, because I notice in myself, sometimes it's just like I'm free flowing and I'm playing. Like I'm playing while snowboarding. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I want to be way better on this next run. I want to make sure that I land this 360, like that type of stuff. And there's a very distinct difference between the two there.
And that's cool. You're having a relationship with yourself where you're trying to better yourself, and it's not so much about like competition, but
it's still competition.
I'm not saying competition
internally
is like a bad thing per se. But
no, I know that. I'm just saying, like, even in that example, if there is not an actual other person you're competing against, you can make it where it's way too competitive internally. That's what I'm saying.
Right. So you're losing the free flow. And
yes,
now you're
that's
in your
what I'm
own
saying.
Battle with yourself.
Yes,
okay,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just brought up another element of the healing process. A massive component of the healing process has to do with freedom. If a person doesn't have enough freedom in their life, there's a fat chance they're going to heal.
Wow.
Freedom is one of the most powerful healing forces I think there is, really. Because freedom allows us to, first of all, connect more to our soul. And our soul is where our desires are. And to truly be living, we have to be in alignment with enough of our own desires. And like with personal sacrifice, we're letting go of our desires more and more and more, and we're getting deeper and deeper into fulfilling other people's needs or even desires, but what about ours? So freedom is huge, but one of the things that blocks freedom oftentimes is fear. People are too afraid to choose freedom.
Totally see that. Yeah. One of the things specifically I want to address is the 15 steps of forgiveness. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly.
Forgiveness is one of those steps.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, in our level 1 training,
is it 15 steps of healing?
15-step process.
Okay.
So it's a process that I developed over all these years where you can sit down, you learn this process. Once it's learned, you use it your whole life. And I've been using it for years, and I teach it to my clients. And but this process is like, it's used when you run into a challenge where you are confronting some kind of stress, whether that's unhappiness, lack of motivation for life, or anger, or fears, etc. And you just move through all 15 steps, and it's a tool that helps transform the challenge into evolution, spiritual evolution. One of the steps is forgiveness, because that might apply. It oftentimes does apply. Like in the example with your mother, in many relationship challenges, forgiveness is a key element to be able to come to a true state of resolution. But that's one step. So we teach a lot about forgiveness. But there's 14 other steps. Forgiveness, though, we talked about earlier, and you're saying you're having a hard time forgiving.
I tried to intellectualize it.
Yeah. So to give some additional insight here, there's some prerequisites. So I teach there's a prerequisite to forgiveness, and one of the primary ones is empathy and compassion. You have to first develop empathy and compassion, and when you have that in your heart for real, you get it, then it's much more likely that you can truly forgive from the heart. So there's different ways to develop empathy and compassion, but oftentimes we can't forgive, for example, because we're in judgment. So we're like, they should just do this, but they're not, but they should. But if you develop empathy and compassion, if you try to get yourself right into their shoes and experience what they're experiencing from their side of the picture, then it can start to become like a revelation, like, wait, this isn't so simple. That's not as easy as I thought it would be.
Or at least I could see where they're coming from.
Yeah, now, so this is like building empathy and compassion. It's not just choosing it. Like, yeah, you need to choose. Do you want to develop empathy and compassion, or you just want to stay angry?
Yeah.
So first is like you want to choose it, but then you have to work on building it. So there's different strategies to truly, authentically build empathy and compassion. One is to put yourself in their shoes. Another thing is to, and this is similar, but to reflect on your own life and ask if you've ever been flawed in some kind of a way, Like, let's say someone loses their temper and does something they regret that's really hurt you, and now you're like pissed at them because of what they did. Can you reflect in your life? Have you ever lost your temper and then did something that wasn't ideal? And if you realize, oh shit, I actually have, then that can soften the judgment.
Yeah.
And now you're starting to realize, look, no one's perfect. Everyone's doing the best they can, which is another element of empathy and compassion, is to realize that we are actually all doing the best we can, even if sometimes it's such a failure to do.
Yeah.
Like, we're all trying to fulfill our needs. We have elaborate needs as a human being, and we're trying to get them fulfilled. And if we weren't taught in childhood how to fulfill them in a loving, mature way, then it means if we're alive today, it means we learned how to fulfill them in some kind of non-ideal way. And that's, we're here, we're alive, and that's what's working.
Yeah.
And it's not so easy to just change that. We just go to the behavior patterns and the ways we've survived. We just automatically go to that because it's worked. So that can help with forgiveness. So do you see what I mean? So
totally,
that's part of the process. Like, one step is forgiveness.
So when we talk about forgiveness and then empathy and compassion underneath that, that's not just, I would imagine, pertaining to empathy, compassion, forgiveness as it relates to others. It's also relates to self empathy, compassion, forgiveness too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, to be able to forgive oneself.
I figured you'd answer that yes. If you would have answered no, absolutely not. Like, oh,
I'm glad you brought that up, because I've had lots of clients with cancer who the reason they have cancer primarily is because they've not been able to forgive themselves. And what they're actually doing to bring religion into this, it's an important topic, because there's like different religions and different perceptions of God and how to relate to God. Like, I think they all have really potent teachings in them. I used to be kind of resistant to religions, but because of so many experience with people sharing, I've kind of identified like really, really powerful aspects of religion. But at the same time, I've noticed there's some really detrimental parts.
Agree.
And so one of the positives, for example, with God is to know that God's already forgiven us, because God already knows you're doing the best you can, already knows that you're not perfect, and that's understandable. And so we don't need God to forgive us. It's already happened. And a lot of people try to, like, they're ask God, please forgive me for what I've done. But the thing that's missing is self-forgiveness. God wants us to learn how to be able to forgive ourselves. And that's a form of self-love.
There's a book sitting behind me called The Red Lion, and there's a really powerful line in that book. I won't get into all the details, but one of the lines, this being appears who the main character of the book had just killed. So he appears to him as this individual is now going through a lot of karmic retribution associated with the act that he just committed. And that being who appears basically says, I have already forgiven you. You are, basically paraphrased, you are both the perpetrator and the abused, meaning that like you have been in these roles in various lifetimes, assuming in this book that reincarnation is real. But the point that he's getting at there is that most people are ultimately struggling with a lack of self-forgiveness related to the wrong that they have done to other people.
Yeah, it's really common. I think one reason for that is because of some of the concepts in society about how to raise children. Like, so in our level 2 training, we get into childhood trauma and the formation of the subconscious and our ego construct, and how that really has a massive impact on triggers. It's like in relationship, you can get triggered. If you form a committed relationship, you're going to start confronting triggers.
Amen to that.
And
so true.
if that's the challenge of a commitment, is can you work through your triggers together and truly heal and grow together?
Yeah.
And that's where there's a lot of challenge, because we're not even taught the tools. Like, I mean, I got married when I was younger. I didn't even know the concept of a trigger. So then when you run into triggers, you're like, my partner's a big problem here.
Yeah.
No, you've been triggered,
right.
You know?
Right.
So I think one of the reasons why people can have a hard time forgiving themselves is because in childhood, if they made mistakes that their parents that upset their parents, whether it should be an upset or not, because sometimes parents are not even fair at all to their kids, and they're in their own mindset and belief system.
Totally.
But the common response to some kind of a mistake is a beating of some kind.
Literally.
Punishment.
Yep.
Whether it's like physical abuse, the baby boomer generation, it's really quite normal to pull down children's pants and smack them on the ass, which is a massive form of humiliation and shaming and abuse. That does not teach forgiveness, right? So if you've got like various forms of punishment and control in childhood, if that happened all the time and there was not really any true forgiveness, then as an adult, if you make mistakes, which we all are going to do at some point, many times, it's like there isn't something inside that's loving to respond to it.
Right.
So people punish themselves.
Right.
So the root cause work, as I call it, is desperately needed in the war on cancer and just beyond that for many diseases, because it extends out how the energy field works and how it causes symptoms in the body, the inflammatory response. It applies to all the other diseases just as much. But yeah, society's really, it's just like I say to an individual with cancer, if I work with anyone, I just tell them cancer is not a gift, but you can turn it into one. And so like with humanity, the rate of cancer is 1 in 2 people.
Crazy.
Every single day, 27,000 people approximately die of cancer. Every day. Cancer's not a gift. But if humanity can turn it into one, the world will change in massive ways, like for the better.
Just to clarify though, forgiveness isn't the first step in the 15-step process, or is it?
Right. No, it's not.
Okay. Okay.
It's much later. I think it's around 9.
So okay. So what you're saying is empathy and compassion come before forgiveness in this 15-step process.
Yeah. Empathy and compassion is another one of the steps.
Got it.
And anger is another step too, where you check in with yourself, and that comes earlier.
Got it. That makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. No, that's it. Because I'm like thinking even with my own internal process, because I was like, I'm pretty sure I tried to jump to empathy and compassion and then forgiveness, but I was angry. That's what it was. I was so angry, and I had to deal with that anger.
Yeah.
Okay.
So an earlier step is anger, and it's earlier for that very reason.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And so we need to acknowledge our anger. And a lot of people, there's lots of reasons why people suppress their anger. Like there's tons. We could talk about that for a long time.
Yeah.
It's important to understand them. You know, some quick examples are it was never safe to express their anger as a child.
Yeah.
Or they were exposed to a lot of anger and violence. There's a difference between anger and violence.
Yeah.
You know, violence is really harming someone. Anger is connecting to something we're upset about, but we're contained, you know, like it's a very different thing. So it's important to acknowledge anger. So in our 15-step process, we have lots of education on that to do it in safe ways, essentially safe, loving ways. You know, like it's not appropriate to scream into someone else's face, but you could scream into a pillow. And that would be appropriate.
So it's basically resolving anger without having to project it on other people.
Yeah.
Which is the healthy way to resolve anger.
Yeah.
Which also requires, I would imagine, that you don't necessarily need that other individual. Because what if that individual has died? If it does pertain to another individual, that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the process is used in spirit.
Yeah.
So you first go and find space alone, library, whatever, beautiful park, spot in the woods, wherever it's possible to be truly alone, and then go into this process. And then you do your personal work with tools to support you. And the goal is to transform the pain or the anger or the whatever has happened that's out of alignment with truth and love, like whatever's not harmony, and transform that through processing, which is both psychological and emotional. So like you're thinking through this process, following the steps, but you're also feeling. And so by doing both, then you can transform everything into lessons. And that's one of the steps. What are my lessons here? What can I really learn from this? And so there's deep teachings around that in the process, and eventually come to a place of peace in our heart. Then when we move forward in life, we are actually carrying peace in our heart. not carrying the anger or the guilt or the shame or whatever it might be. And so it's very potent. We've had lots of students like cry in the process, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
And then also change their life because of it. And we've had students who've taken the training heal from cancer. They heal themselves. So the purpose of the tool is to heal ourselves, to find the way to heal from within.
Yeah. And I'm sure you frame it this way, that like, this is just a process that I've developed, but ultimately you're the one who has to do the work, and it may require some nuance based on your unique situation.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've learned over the years too, there's this fine line of, as a coach, helping people, where you can be too supportive, too helpful, and then you're crossing sort of a line where they're not taking enough responsibility for themselves. And then also you can just not be there enough.
Yeah.
Because people need the tools and people need some support. But yeah, that's another key thing for healing with cancer, is that you've got to take responsibility and realize that any support that you have is beautiful, but realize that you got to use that support with the ultimate goal of not needing it. People can sort of lose themselves in that. We need to heal from within.
Yeah. Amen. As a sort of final question, as it relates to resolving, let's take, for example, someone who's dealing with one of the cancers that relates to rage. When they unpack that rage and get to the root, and I'm saying like at the very, 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 very depth of it, and they have done the resolution process, what do they find regarding their fundamental belief systems about who and what they are, and how, in someone who is healed, do they look? What do they truly understand about them as it pertains to the nature of reality and God?
Oh, that's a really deep question. So you're talking spiritually here now, right? One deep realization is that in a large way, you are creating the challenge yourself, and you weren't seeing reality. You were seeing a skewed perception that through the lens of your own pain that has been there since like for years. And actually everything's a lot more okay than you thought. And God's got it under control much more than you thought. So there's a letting go.
Yeah.
And there's a deeper feeling of aloneness, comfortability with being alone, like much, much less detachment or attachment, sorry, like much more detached.
But in a healthy, detached way, right?
Yeah, a healthy detached. Now there's a feeling of calm, a feeling of peace, a feeling of acceptance. And it's real. You can't fake it. I have a bit of a challenge with some of the, like there's a lot of heavy focus in many instances in the power to heal with our mind. And there's, of course, some value in that. But we really have to heal on the soul level. And that can't be done just with our mind. Yeah.
It has to be done with the heart.
Has to be done with the heart. It has to be done through experience, right? Like we can't just imagine we went and spoke our truth to our boss that we're so afraid of, and we have kidney cancer because we're so afraid to confront the person who controls us or whatever.
Have you ever heard of family constellations?
We have to do it. Yeah, family constellations. I haven't taken...
That's what just came up with me as it relates to this, though, too, because, like, again, sometimes it may not be appropriate to go talk to your boss, or maybe the individual who it happened with is dead, or maybe it's just going to make it worse. So family constellations are ways you can do it without them present.
Yeah. Sometimes it calls for doing it alone. Sometimes it calls for doing it with the other. If you're in a committed relationship,
you kind of have to in that case.
You're a team now.
Yeah.
All your energies merge together. You've got to be, like, my approach to relationships is you've got to be 100% transparent. 100% devoted to the truth together, and create a safe space for that. And don't keep anything from each other, like not anything. And I've only seen problems arise when things are not transparent in a relationship.
We have too. Yeah, 100%. It's happened in our relationship. And once those things were revealed, it brought healing and it brought us way closer together. Yeah.
The key is to create a really, truly safe space for it, though. So that can be a challenge, but it's important. That's one of the things to work for.
Yeah.
Towards.
Is there anything else you want to share with respect to resolution?
Well, back to what you brought up about God, and is to realize that we are in a learning process. It's not the end. If our current identity has failed in some way, it's failed for a reason, because we're meant to let that go. And there's new ways of living, and there's new life ahead. We just have to choose it. We just have to actually choose it. So you really got to find motivation, real motivation, again, from the heart. And you'll know because you'll feel a spark in the heart. So you got to find it. So that's a huge thing to focus on. Put less of your time into researching cures and put more of your time into soul searching.
Yeah. Yeah. A process of almost unbecoming.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Take off the layers that weren't serving you clearly and realize that there's new ways, the better ways that you're being called to.
Since you brought up cures, one last question, I guess, because there's this concept or sort of idea amongst the superficial truther community that the government is hiding the quote cure for cancer.
Okay, yeah. Of course I've heard that a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I've felt that way in the past too. With my belief about how cancer really works, I would say that there is no possibility of the typical understanding of what a cure would be. It's like impossible to even have one. And I think that's true for a reason too, for spiritual reasons. Because this reality that we're in as human beings, it's not just a random event journey where nothing really matters, like there's no good and bad. There is a progression. There is this progression of the soul. There is an evolutionary process here that we're like moving through. And cancer is very spiritual because it's calling us to evolve in the way that we need to, where we've got stuck and haven't. And if there was such thing as a cure, it would just eliminate the whole thing.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. And it also, in my mind, implies that there's like a singular cause. And I guess in a nuanced way there is, because it's ultimately comes back to chronic stress, chronic emotions, right? But I'm talking about singular physical cause that if you just take this magical pill, it's going to dissolve cancer.
It's not going to work because the cause of cancer is originating in the energy field, which is connected to our consciousness and our free will choice and our soul. And that's like stepping down and appearing in our body as a tumor. So if we use the example of forgiveness, let's say forgiveness is like one of the primary elements in a particular person's situation. It isn't always there involved, right? But let's say forgiveness.
So you don't always go through the 15 steps.
Right.
You look at
step. You look at the step and you ask your soul.
Does it relate to this?
Does this relate? Sometimes forgiveness doesn't involve, So if forgiveness is a factor, is it possible to find a cure for that? Like, could you go and take a forgiveness supplement where like you take it and like, I just forgave my mom. It's done.
No. Nope.
Of course not. Like,
absolutely not.
No. It would work if we were a robot.
Yeah.
Where you just take a outside input and put it inside the robot. And now the robot's saying, I forgive. This totally overlooking the soul. It's like spiritual bypassing. If you're wanting a cure, you're caught in an illusion. And perhaps perhaps that's fine in the grand scheme of things with people that don't have good intentions. As long as people are searching for a cure, cool. Because we have a $15 trillion business on that.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So, but I mean, is it possible to have a $15 trillion business based on helping people evolve their soul and spiritual growth and making the world a better place?
I don't think so.
Let's bring it in as a possibility. I mean, let's at least energize it, you know?
Yeah,
but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah. Maybe. It's
I
tough
think
for me,
I
though.
think anything's possible.
Anything is possible.
Yeah.
That's
But
good.
yeah, we could talk about that and try to see.
Maybe I just have preconceived ideas regarding like what type of business accumulates $15 trillion. But yeah, you're probably right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're on a paradigm shift either way. We're on the verge of one. So yeah.
One more thing I want to stress about GNM is that related to symptoms and why they appear in our body, and that is that when a symptom appears in our body, like a tumor, how I approach that and how I think this is really important to perceive it this way is that our body is truly compromised. Our body has become compromised. It does not mean that our body has everything under control. So what it does mean is our body knows how to heal. It is mounting an inflammatory response. It knows that there's an issue, and it's trying to deal with the problem. So there's nothing wrong with our body in that sense. We don't have to fix the body or teach it to do something. But what's important to understand is that it's truly compromised. And the root cause is what we have to address now.
Mm-hmm.
So while our body works on dealing with that and keeping it at bay, we need to now resolve the real issue. And when we resolve the issue, then our body will just continue to do what it already knows how to do, and it'll clean up the tumor or the symptoms, whatever it might be.
That makes sense. So our body's not making a mistake necessarily. The body and nature, fungus in this case, is doing what they were designed to do based on almost, you could say, our lack of understanding of who and what we truly are, and lack of, again, it requires the steps, but getting to true compassion, true forgiveness of ourself as it pertains to a specific emotional event.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
That makes a lot of sense.
So don't think the body's got everything under control. There's just nothing wrong here. It's like, no, the body is compromised here.
Yeah, you could honestly say the body's sending you a signal that something is wrong here.
And it's saying, we need you to pay attention to something. Something's going on.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That totally makes sense. Thank you for ending with that, because that clarifies some of the lingering questions I had in my head earlier. That makes a lot more sense now. Okay.
Oh, you're welcome.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you so much for joining me. This was a long one, so thanks everyone for tuning in for the whole conversation. Thank you for being here, man. This was great.
Thanks a lot, Alec. I appreciate it.
Yeah.